system where I never had to think about any of it. I was able to just rig and make shapes. And so coming out of there and then having to like, oh crap, I have to solve like a twist extraction at a shoulder now, and I haven't had to think about this in so long. And how hard that is. You know, you're just like, that is not a simple problem to solve.
Yeah.
That's what I'm fighting with now, is like having to go, oh, right, it hurts more when you don't have a pipeline.
I have a confession. Yesterday and the day before, we did a new solver for MGear that is like a matrix constraint thing that to remove a bunch of nodes connections from the joints, and I had to change the logic of something, and I spent like half of last week struggling to remember how I neutralized this joint rotation thing and so on. I was like, I don't remember anything, and just testing my code, and finally I figured out yesterday. I didn't fix it yet, but I know, and it was horrible because I did it like first time a few years ago, like maybe 4 years ago or something. I didn't touch that logic until now, and it was like, oh my god, what's this? Why is not neutralizing? Why? And then it's stupid me. I know.
It's a terrible feeling. You're like, I solved this once. I remember solving it, and I don't remember how I did it. And then I go and search, and I posted the answer somewhere.
Yeah.
And usually it's on an Autodesk form.
Normally
so then I'm like, oh, that's how I did it, right? Thanks, Google.
Yeah. In my case, is the code itself. But it's like the Back to the Future when Doc hits his head and knows how to make the I don't know how it's in English, the flux
capacitor.
And then he hits again and forgets how to do it again. Yes, similar thing all the time.
It's like when I code. I'm very kind of like verbose with my code, but it's more like a little tip for me to use to like my future self.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to, especially if it's like, I have time to fix this now, and then you have no idea when you're going to look at it again.
I comment my code like crazy just because I want to look back and like read my own comments and
and not have to decipher what you did.
I just want to like
like a journal home. Like, I've been on the front line. This is day 12. I've done this 4 times and none of it worked, and this is the last try. And then you no look at for months, and you go back and you're like, what did why didn't that work for? Oh, right, because I already tried that. Oh yeah, there's no way around this, I guess. Okay, that's what I worked out.
I always store. I have like a private snippets repository, and I store everything there, like all the garbage, all the quick, everything is there. And the first thing I try to put like a reasonable name into that, because it's the only like sorting thing. And I search like literally with Windows Explorer, the Explorer search, like let this something.
Isabel, I love your thing about one of your favorite tools being a renamer, because I'm right there with you.
I felt so weird. Like afterward, I'm like, was that like a bad tool to mention? It's like renaming. It's like so simple.
No, but that came up so often. Like, how do
naming things right?
Like when
Polysurface 1, Polysurface 2, Polysurface 577.
I like when you make joints, it's like joint 1, joint 2, joint 3, joint 20.
I need to remove every other letter and uppercase 2 of these, and all the stuff you could do in a text editor in 30 seconds is impossible in a 10 grand software.
Scratch, that like renaming tool was like, that was my rigging buddy, that renaming tool.
Well, naming conventions is a whole world of things. I remember being in a studio that we didn't barely had. I mean, it was in 2000 or 2001. It was no pipeline at all. It was just, this is the folder, you save it with this name. And I remember the final 2, final review,
7782,
and some of my colleagues is there to put
for real final
turbo.
For real final
turbo.
Wow.
Sometimes we'll have like meetings at my work, and we get into naming convention, and I'm just like, I don't want to talk about naming, because everyone has like their own like naming convention that they like or an opinion, and so like when you try to get like 20 riggers to agree on the naming convention, it's like,
is it LF or LT or L?
Yeah. Like, do we want to use, guys, do you want to use capital, or do you want to use all lowercase or uppercase or underscore in between?
See, again, that's the problem. That like the curse of Maya is that there's like, well, how do you want to do it? You can back yourself into any corner you want.
Yeah.
I feel that Unreal's that way too.
Yeah, Unreal feels that way too. It's like, well, you can pick multiple ways, but only one of them is going to be optimized if you scale, and everything else will work until it doesn't, which is like how I feel like half the rigging is. It's like it works until it doesn't. This will work until your character does this, and then like the arm explodes. You're like, well, but I need the wrist to heal, I don't know. And I feel like I've been fixing, the past year has been fixing those kind of problems over and over and over again. Like it's a Groundhog's Day for the same problems. And it's not even joint orient anymore, although it was like 2 years ago. Everyone came to me with the same problem, like, hey, my mocap doesn't solve to the rig correctly and it breaks downstream. I'm like, yeah, let me see your elbow. Oh, the elbow is on 3 axes. Your joint orients are bad. Yell at your riggers. And then like someone else comes up and they're like, hey, we can't get this thing to work. And it's like, okay, right, well, let me see your skeleton. Oh, it's in a claim format, and it's looking at the Unreal skeleton, and the Unreal skeleton legs are broken and the knees are bent, and you're just like, yeah, okay, I'm not actually doing any rigging. I'm just like an Excel spreadsheet transform function, and I'm just like mapping one word to the other and axis and coming out the other end going, yeah, I think you need to fix this, but okay, we'll just work backwards through the maze and find our way to the start. And every one of those problems is like, well, this wasn't a problem at first. It's a problem now because you want to do something else, and no one knew that you wanted, you kind of organically end up where we're like, well, we need to do this thing now. And you're like, yes.
Here's a question related to that. Alicia, Elizabeth, have either of you done any consulting? Have you ever gone into another studio and tried to help them solve problems?
No, I've only ever done fixing.
Mm-hmm. Just my own.
I've only ever inherited rigs from previous people or previous productions, and then had to unbreak things.
So how much of that, I mean, you're on the render side a little more, right? Like my partner Chad, for a long time, like the rigging group that was on a lot of big game projects that have been around for a long time, you inherit those problems, but you can't fix anything either, because it's legacy assets that are still being used for 10 years. So you can't just change something.
I love your lip. I love the lip, Isabella.
You're describing my life right now.
I know. Well, I steered it that way a little, but yeah, like I'm just curious for a lot of, it feels like for commercial stuff and for a lot of projects, like as soon as the rig's done, if there's a new project, like it gets redone anyway a little bit. There's not much legacy carryover, but for game stuff it goes longer. I don't know. How do you feel about like your current situation with managing assets from the past? Anybody really?
For you.
Alicia.
Oh, you guys. I was just trying to be quiet, not stomp on everybody.
Yeah.
I know.
So recently, no, but like I have worked at studios where we partner with another studio and we inherit rigs from them, and sometimes I'm sure Isabella, it's the same for you. You're like, but I wanna, but I can't, but I want to. Oh, so I feel like that's part of the struggle. So there's just a lot of cursing and swearing and trying to either write stuff so it will work properly and not kind of on top. A lot of cursing and swearing. That's pretty much.
Is there a specific area or something that is consistently like you wish it was done a different way, or something that you've had to fix more of than you felt like you should have? Like, why do people still do this?
Oh, I don't want to go into a rant.
What do you mean? This is what this is
Yeah,
for.
it's
This is
about-
a rant table.
Round one. Fight.
You can message me and I'll rant for you to come.
No, rant away.
I always
Well,
say you
like I
can't be a
said-
tech artist unless you complain. Like,
Oh,
if you
I
really know how
gotta
to
rant. I
complain
gotta
about
rant for
things-
this.
Listen, you hire a plumber or electrician, they're always going to tell you that the previous person did it wrong, no matter what you do for your house, right? They come in like, who wired this? Well, and then like the next day someone else comes in, who wired this? And it's like, well, you did. I don't know, but
You did 2 years ago.
Yeah, some...
exactly, right.
Yes.
So like, it's not even that it's not even has to be a rant, but just if, I'm curious if it's something specific to you ingesting stuff to your pipeline, or if it's just a general thing that you guys don't do anymore, maybe that other people are, or just some guidance for the general public.
Rant.
Oh, this is my rant.
Or rant, yeah.
Rant.
I
Go
find-
rant.
I find that a lot of I feel like I'm gonna start a thing. I feel like a lot of people think that rigging has to be complex or complicated, right? And so
Yes.
you're not a lot of the times, just sometimes. I've received good stuff, but like you're looking at stuff and you're like, why?
Yeah.
Why did you? Because you're looking at this like thing and you're like, but that could have just been this.
Yeah.
And so that's what I see a lot of, and I don't know why. Like I don't know if like we feel as though in order for it to be a good rig, it needs to be complicated, or if it's more that because we don't think things through, which might be an experience thing.
Yeah.
You can sometimes you can actually see where somebody has painted themselves into a corner.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's for me, it's really just like overcomplicated
Okay.
rigs.
Is it overcomplicated in that, not necessarily complexity of the rig itself, but just it doesn't allow you to simplify easy? Like if you don't need that complication, is it that you can't extract it away from it easily, or is it like, you know what I'm saying? Like, is it complicated and intertwined in a way that you're like, you could see the iteration to the point where they didn't plan it through, or is it just, this is a tangled mess and complicated? Like, I can't just get rid of this and leave it a control, right? Like,
I've seen the best example I can say is like I've seen a lot with like kind of doing like a set-driven key kind of rig, right? Yeah. Where you can just see where like someone there's like a layer and this connects this and this connects this and this connects this, and then usually what happens is that there's a pop, right? And so when you're trying to like figure out, and you can just kind of see where they added these layers to fix it, and all they did was like narrow down where the pop happens, but the pop is still there.
Yeah, you push it down here and it pops up over here.
Yeah. So like that's
set-driven keys with hard lines, like they don't extend it. You know, it's like, well, it'll never go over 90, right?
Yes. Yes.
Alicia, do you find that I've never worked in film, or like honestly, I've never rendered a thing. Like you're
not missing much.
You're just rendering it at 30 frames a second. You're rendering.
Okay, yeah, true. But do you think that like the overcomplication you find is specific to film and like commercial or feature animation, or do you think it's just general? Or like one specific area you think like, oh, like these rigs get complicated because.
No,
I'm gonna rant after Alicia's done. I got some.
I know you've got something.
Well, I'm trying to be good and not stop.
You're big.
I've seen it both. So I've been on a show where we were doing like the game engine stuff that we do, and I've been on shows where it's pre-rendered, and it's a lot of the times I think that things are done because maybe it's something that's cool, like, oh, this is a cool thing, and like there's a lot of like excitement about that thing, but it's like, yeah, but that thing is like super slow, dude. Like, why?
Is it like feature, like they're feature creeping?
Oh, that's it right there.
Yes.
Yeah, I've had this problem for years teaching rigging, right? Like, and you know, I appreciate you, Isabel, saying like you liked how I taught, but you know, some people, for years we would get requests, hey, I want to learn advanced rigging, and it's like, that doesn't mean anything. And you want to learn, if I translate that, it means you want to learn complicated things so that you can show off. You don't want to learn good rigging. And it's and that's not that in itself is not a problem. There are all kinds of fun, complicated things to try and explore and to actually use to learn how to manage complex connections, or to try and emulate something like the surface pickers from DreamWorks or whatever it is, right? Like there are a lot of cool demo examples to show off like ego stroking a little bit, but also just like it's fun to work on as a challenge. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to learn it as a part of your process for production. And it also usually comes with the same thing, like, well, you know, why do you want to learn that? And it's like, well, an animator saw a feature somewhere and I don't know what to do with it. And it's like, yeah, they
my rant list
something. I know. You know, and I've had this discussion the past few years with different studios, both animation side, and because I end up sitting between the motion capture side and animation and rigging side, you know, I see the animators who just want like the Anzavin RAF, like they just want the control to do exactly what they want and they don't want to do anything else, and they will animate. And I joke about a rigless rig and animators actually doing their job, right? Their job is to animate. Quit asking for complicated Rube Goldberg mousetraps to set a key. Like, just do your job. You want a fast rig, and then you want 20 attributes that slow it down, and then you don't use those attributes and you complain that the rig's slow, right? Like, your job is to just set keys and move on.
We had a script that would run and look at a movie and look at all the rig controls and what percentage of them were actually animated. No one liked that.
That is so passive aggressive.
Because it's like, well, we have 1,000 controls.
Right.
Guess how many were actually used?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that.
That's so
was it like a rig that was like layered?
Genius.
Yeah.
Like it was like a rig that had one purpose, and then it was like they added a feature, and now it's like more purposes, but then it's like layers and layers and layers of purpose. So now it's like multi-purpose. Is that what was that like the history?
In my opinion, there's two things, right? There's one where I don't want to have to move 2 controls to get my answer. I want to move 1, or I don't want to move 3. I want to use 1, which is often terrible because now you've got to try to balance weird things to get your result. And the other is I have this special look I want. I've got this special thing that I want. Yeah. And like, so you create a special custom control, and both are problematic.
Yeah, and like code without comments, no one else, or even the animator who animated with that control, when they go back to that shot, it's just baked keys anyway, right? Like a final animation is almost mocap or sim. It's frames on everything. They don't remember what they did. They're just going to delete it and start over. And for years, I was like, use other methods. And because I'm a techie nerd on top of like having to do it with motion, like I don't care. I can keep track of what the rig layer is doing. But just like a script, you're like, I don't remember what is the special sauce of spice mix to create this pose. I just am going to start over, zero everything and rebuild it, because that's faster than trying to figure it out. And there's no codes and there's no comment in the frame. The pose doesn't tell you how it was created. It's just there. So for me, I didn't care about that because I could always just push it to an animation layer and get rid of it. And anyone who's worked in Motion Builder or mocap, we all have this like, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm not making precious frames, right? Like it's like someone who did a drawing and is like, that drawing is precious. No, it's you're already done with it, move on. And that's the way I feel about animation poses. Like, who cares? It's already it's changeable. It's
I've
not
been on the other side of that, where every pose is precious.
every pose is precious, and every curve and all your handles, and I'm like, just bake it, move on, right? Who cares? But if you've never had, if you don't have the tools in place and you don't have the experience, then you get very tied into like, well, I spent all this time and I've layered all this stuff and I've created this thing, and it's very the iteration instantly drops because you've created this, you've sunk so much effort and time into fixing and shaping something that then to redo it is like, it's crushing. And on the flip side of that, if you know that that's the process and you build rigs and tools that are fast to iterate with, then you don't care. Like, I'm just going to bake it and move on. And I've seen this with different ways, right? Like, I just watched a video on animating a prop, and I'm not going to say who did it, but it was a mix of like constraints and attributes and tools and trying to explain like which thing controls what. And in the end, you're like, like all of this would be simpler if you just baked it to the prop once and then just use that as the source, right? Like you think through the process one time instead of juggling which attribute has to turn on when. And all of that is having to be, I've used this a lot lately, like the idea of technical debt. The rig is creating tech debt for the artists. Every frame they create creates more and more stuff to manage over time. And every switch and every attribute you blend and every kind of thing that you accumulate by the time your animation is done is tech debt. And so the iteration time starts to, it's like those monster trucks that pull the sled, and the weight gets heavier and heavier. By the end of the shot, the weight is sitting there and you're just bogged down and you're like, I don't want to touch this.
Yeah.
They want me to redo it. And well, I'm just going to delete stuff, and now I need more time. And
in games, Isabella, can you use layers? Fast. Can you guys use layers?
Oh, my animators hate layers.
That's what I'm asking.
Why though?
Really?
Because they don't.
They hate them.
How?
I don't know why. I use them in my last studio. I don't know why they don't like them. I think it just gets confusing. Maybe because what you were saying, where like one person will animate one way and it'll be like stacks and stacks of effort and like using animation layers, and then you hand it off to somebody else and they open it, they can't follow. I guess they can't, that's like my guess.
It does.
It becomes
creates
a little
stack of,
it becomes a little disorganized off the bat when you open the file and you don't know how that pose was made, and then you see like 5 animation layers and you're like, oh no.
Because at Pixar we didn't use any layers. There's no animation layers.
Yeah, and DreamWorks added some tools that let you. It's like the Source engine. If you've ever seen the Valve cinematic source machine, where you could basically kind of regraph samples. Like you could like an animation layer, but it was deforming the actual animation keys instead of creating an actual layer. It was like you could resweep. You could kind of like soft mod or redeform the animation into a different shape, the same way Layer is doing, but without the actual stack. So those kind of tools are really powerful, but you don't get the interactivity and you don't have the history of that change.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah.
And I think people that get bogged down with layers create too many, and then they're trying to manage all those, and that's not the point. And again, this is, to me, that is a workflow and a training issue. And a little bit of like the TD doesn't want to deal with a bunch of layers for their export pipeline. Because
it's directly related to what Alicia was saying about complexity, right? It's
complexity
versus rig complexity, and it's funny it seems like the advanced rigging is make it simple.
Oh my God, less is more.
Right, I struggled with that. I mean, I remember spending all this time making hips auto center between feet, and you're like, man, this is great. Until an animator uses it, says, rip this out. I'm like,
how do I turn this off?
Right. So like learning that lesson is a hard one, I think.
Yeah. I think the complexity issue is manageable. The difference with a rig complexity and animation layers is the animation layers, at any point, I can collapse the complexity and go back to 0. And a rig, you can't. If you rip the controls out, you're breaking stuff you don't know.
Yeah.
And in trying to like go, well, I think I don't know what all these attributes do. I'm just going to use this one control and I'm going to counter animate it. Like I'm going to add 20 more keys to this control because I don't know what these other attributes are doing, and I don't have time to worry about it. I'm just going to move this control. For an animation layer, to me, I can stack as many as I want, and then I'm done, and I get rid of them.
I think for me, like when I work with an animator and I'm building a rig, I hear the word counter animate, to me, that tells me like I need to take a step back and like look at what I'm actually building. Like why is because counter animate, like that kind of tells me that something is broken, and so it's not about, like what Alicia was saying, it's not about like solving the problem by like digging deep trying to get like that edge case. It's like looking at the big picture and seeing like, okay, what is actually like the thing that's not working for them, and is there a case where I can cover like all the animation cases that they want to cover.
No,
do you
if
find
that makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Perfect
And
sense.
I'm curious with both of you, since I mean you're just kind of still getting your ground, you know, like figuring things out. But like, and Mikhail, I'm curious about because MGear standardized, right? You have a little bit more of a structure, so that anybody using the rig kind of knows what to expect. But how do you handle animation requests when they don't actually tell you what's wrong? Like, how do you discover issues when they won't actually tell you the issue, and they just they
I can't get this shape.
This is it's I'm just curious, like, how much, when you get a feedback of like, hey, something's broken, what is your discovery process for figuring out, is it my rig, is it their workflow, or is it where is the actual problem coming from?
What did you do to get to that problem?
Okay, the first thing
you got this control at 500 and this at -50.
Well, in the case of Maya, the first thing I ask if you have child compensation activated.
Oh my God!
This fixed 80% of the issues normally.
Broke the rig. How?
Yeah. The rig is broken. Okay.
Well, here's a question.
And later it depends. It depends.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I have an answer for you, Brad.
Yes.
So the rig is broken to me is not an acceptable statement.
Yes, supervisor. Yes.
Thank you, supervisor.
Lay down the law.
That's right. This is not going to fly here.
This is not acceptable.
Yeah. Well, the best answer is in my machine works.
Or no supervisor, right? Like this is just,
yeah.
So for me, like the rig is broken. I'm like, what version are you using? Usually it's first, what version are you using? Because sometimes the answer is just like, you need to update.
Right.
And then it's like, can you give me the scene? Can you I just need more information, right? Because what I don't want to have to do is I don't want to have to open up your file to figure out what happened, right? Like that's like, I will, because that's part of my job, but like that is like the last third,
last resort.
Right. Because a lot of times what we'll do is I'll take your animation, I'll throw it on my rig, and a lot of the times I don't have that problem.
That's a good trick, right? Take just the curves and say, let me see what the motion looks like, not your file. That's a good trick. I kind of asked this partly because and sorry, if you've still got more, I just was going to say because you know, this is something that, you know, both Miguel and Rich deal with as tool creators to the public to some degree, right? So you and me and Izzy, to some degree, we have a closed environment for our troubleshooting. To some, I have a little bit wider range of stuff just because both student and consulting, but like Miguel and Rich now have public-facing tools. So how do you get people to communicate, and what's the fastest way to give them an answer that isn't like, I don't know, let me look and I'll figure it out? Like, how you pull out the answer you need from those people is good.
Sort of like good beta testing though, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and like as a rigger, I don't want to hear the word broken.
Right.
Because it doesn't mean it might not be broken. It might just not be doing what you want. An animator doesn't want me to come and say the rig is done, right? They don't want to hear that they don't have time to give me more feedback. And I don't want to hear that my work is broken, because it's not broken.
Right.
It you know, and it's like learning how to speak that language and translate. So is the rig broken? No, it's not. But what is it not doing that you want it to do? And that's a different discussion.
I feel like that might be a nerve, Rich.
Oh yeah.
We might have jumped
Yeah,
into
tell me
that.
how you
Let him
really
find
feel.
his list of rants. Man.
Well, it's like, don't tell me it's broken, because it's not broken. If
Yeah.
you drive the control to 1,000, it's not broken. You know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
why did they do it to 1,000? What
Well,
didn't
that's
you give
that's
them?
the real question: is what are you trying to do? That's exactly
Yeah.
what Izzy said. Like, what
Yeah.
you're counter animating, which means I've done something that's causing. There's something that's not doing what you want.
Yeah.
It could be
It's not,
broken.
but it's not I've done something. It's that I didn't have enough information.
Yeah.
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 If I can say something in the I have to like two parts here on or to like in the studio. I'm also like working on assets and projects and like more like a user of my tools, let's say.
Yeah.
So that's the more regular rigger work. And then as a developer, I have the input from my studio, my colleagues, and also the MGR community. And normally the you can see from everything. Normally the people ask, yeah, first doesn't work. What doesn't work? Can you give? We ask like standardized. Like if we go on the MGR forum, you will see some of the support. Almost all the threads are support requests, and it starts the same thing. And in many situations, we ask, can you give us the log error? And no, there is no error. Okay. And in some situations it depends. Normally it's Chris. It's the person who is taking care of more of these parts, but I try to help also.
Yeah.
Yes. And he's the community manager. It's the thank you, Chris.
He's awesome.
Yeah, it's awesome. You're awesome. Yes. And well, but everybody tries to help. Like all the MGear dev team tries to help. So and normally it's you can see a kind of pattern there, and ultimately we ask for these scenes if there is something that we think that is really like, because it's not like it's specific to help one person when they ask. It's if this person brings up some like general issue we want to check. So it's good for everybody, for us. So we ask for the scene if they can share stuff or the guides and things like that. And yeah, it's not like clear path. It's more like pinpoint. But some situations, you can see when they have something like, oh, try this or try that, or like lately I had a few people saying that the rigs are very slow or things like that, and I have 30 rigs on the scene and it's very slow. Okay.
100 characters in the scene. Why isn't it moving quick enough?
And when the same as advanced rigging.
And
what does that mean?
It was like not only one person, but some people say like, oh, the first frame in your MGear, the first frame is slow and then it goes smoother, and say it's not MGear, it's Maya Parallel, the evaluation manager that needs to graph your scene. And if you have many rigs, it will take longer to evaluate that. So it's how Maya works. So and funny enough, if when they say it's slow, sometimes now I ask, do you have Redshift loaded?
Really?
Yeah. If you render, I have a video on my other channel talking about that. But if you have Redshift, I use it for my personal projects. And the first time before was no way to like deactivate that, but now the first time you render, do a preview, it launch a bunch of script jobs to update all his data. And then after you do the first render, everything is super slow. You have like huge chunk of dirty evaluation, like one line, and then so when I see that in the graph, the first thing I ask if you have Redshift, because it's 99% is the people who has Redshift. And then you can deactivate that, but still some, I mean, you can, they added some commands to delete that, but it still remain, you have some script job that cannot get rid of that after you render the first time. So the only way to get rid of that is save your scene, reopen, and it's...
How interesting. Yeah, and that's the
and it's no rigging.
Outside world with a million different variables versus a closed pipeline where you can walk through, like everything's named the same, everything uses the same. We have the same video cards in all of our machines. We're like the variables are cut out. And again, I've lost that consistency. So now there's all these variables.
You no longer have the protection of the closed environment.
Yeah, what I'm saying
oh
is
my
like,
gosh.
it's sorry, it's going.
Like, I sort of felt like you were in a nest where it's windy outside, but I'm not feeling the wind, and it's all good. And then you jump out and you're like, holy crap!
It's a hurricane.
I gotta flap my wings. What's going on?
Yeah, but now you need to ask even if you have this renderer or why the renderer should be affecting the rig, but still, like, it's, if you think about that, it's not. I mean,
yeah, I think that's kind of why I liked, for the most part, working with motion builder stuff for a while, because it itself was a little bit isolated. You didn't have a whole lot of stuff just like coming into the scene, like Maya can carry all kinds of stuff. But I've been finding like Blender's been interesting because you can get all kinds of add-ons and scripts, but they're like sitting between a plugin and a script. So it loads at start and it's sitting there in the background and it's doing stuff, and you're like, go check the console and there's a bunch of errors. You're like, oh, I wonder if that's affecting my stuff. And it's been interesting learning how to troubleshoot a different software with a different language. And I don't know how to do it in Houdini yet, but it's been a process of just discovering, like, where does the information go and where do I go to find it if there's something wrong. And I think that the thing that is consistent is cycles, right? If you create a loop or a cycle in your rig somewhere, like, no matter what software you're in, it's going to cause problems, and people don't know to look for it. Or they just go, it seems okay, and they move on with it.
Come on, let it out. Come on.
Someone has something to say about that.
The number of times, like, I've in my capacity, I've been in someone's rig, and because I always have script editor open, and I see the cycle go up. I'm like, you have a cycle? Oh yeah, but it doesn't do anything. I'm like, no,
it's still doing it.
That does not go out. Because we've all been there where we've done that, and you're like, it's fine. And then it's like, it'll be like Friday at like 5:30. The animators have a delivery, and you get a panic message being like, something's happening, and you're like,
Every time
that came back to bite me in the butt.
yeah. I can't undo all of a sudden, or every time I click, the control moves away twice
or like
as far.
Something flips.
Yeah.
I think we are going to rambling.
Too, right? It's like, it's not that it happens once, it's that it just keeps on happening, and you can't take it back.
And so I think finally, I wish that information was. I think it's another one of those things where the experience is like, that is a warning sign something has gone wrong. But the number of times I've seen people create those situations and not know that not know to look for it, not know where to look for it, and not know why it's a problem is fairly high. And usually lately it's been with animators. I've been helping try to deal with like constraints and switches and prop management and just, you're like, this seems very obvious. If you constrain something back to itself, it's going to freak out. So this is a temporary state, and yet they don't understand it, and it's not their fault. It's just like the software allows you to do it, and it doesn't do anything about it. It just goes, sure, you wanted to do this ridiculous thing, I'm just gonna freak out behind the scenes, and good luck to you.
I think going back to like the problem solving thing and getting feedback, there is something to be said about receiving feedback from an animator or rigger, whoever your like client is, but there's also like skills in giving like your problem. Like, let's say I were to like give feedback to Miguel about M gear or something. Like, there is a methodology and skill to do that. It's not just my rig is broken. Like, I'm not gonna just say to you my rig is broken. There's also like that skill developed, and like giving context, like, okay, this is, see, like the way that I present, like if I have a problem, I'll be like, hello, this is what I did, this is what I'm trying to do, this is what I tried to do to fix it. I looked in the script editor, I didn't see anything. I think it was this and that problem. I don't think it is. So I'm like giving all this context
perfection
to give you the best tools in order to help me. I'm trying to help you.
It's like you're a professional.
Yes. Well, it's not. I see. I think I commented in one or a few episodes on the podcast already, but I don't know if somebody follows F1, the race, the car race thing. So no,
bit.
in F1, there is many teams that they have the official pilots, the pilots that go the race, and they have the test pilots. The test pilots are not the fastest, but they're really good fine-tuning the car.
Right.
And
that
normally
would be the anim buddy, the animator that knows how the rig
Tech
is supposed to
animator.
work.
Yeah.
Right. So like I will get notes on when I put these two controls together, I don't get a shape I expect, which is my issue. I'm not providing the controls in the right way. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Like having a very well kind of somebody that understands the tech behind the rig to give you good notes is incredibly valuable.
And I can say depends of which animator or supervisor I work in, my rigs are better or worse.
Yeah, absolutely. So do any of you work to educate the animation team to give you feedback in a way that is better?
What's interesting, so we had this anim buddy, that's what we called it at Pixar, and you'd have an animator with a rigging TD, and you were working on bringing a character to life, and there was this constant cycle of experienced rigger who's been through it working with a new animator that wants to be a tester, and vice versa. So when the animator starts giving you notes, and I'm like, because at the beginning of my career there, I was the other side. Like I had an experienced animator that was helping me learn the language of what they expect, and then the other side, right? Before I left, I was teaching animators to say, hey, here's how this is supposed to work, and here's what this is the result supposed to happen. In that context, do you like where the jaw is pivoting from, or whatever? It was teaching them how to kind of what's happening, not the technical necessarily, but just these things come together. And so that was always where we were. And if you got two inexperienced people in that relationship, it was a mess. It's like having two people that don't know how to dance going out on the dance floor, right? Like it's just an absolute mess. So that's my experience with it.
Yeah.
So I've entered a studio where there's not great communication, and kind of like what Izzy was saying, it's really as far as like, hey, if you have an issue, like this is the context I need. Exactly what you're saying, Izzy, like help me help you.
Yeah.
And I think I have to say that like the one thing that I find people don't grasp right away, it's like just say please.
You're saying be nice?
No.
Not demanding and panicked.
Yeah, just
like have patience with me.
Yeah, or just like I suggest it even like for modeling notes, right? Like because we're talking about like rigging animation, but there's also like rigging modeling, right?
Right. Yeah.
And like hey, I'm looking at the model. There's this, and this. This is actually a problem for me because I need this, and this.
Yeah.
And not. Hey, the model does this, I need this, this is crappy because I have seen this.
This is broken, fix it.
This
model
broken,
is garbage.
Fix it. Right? Like, please, thank you, like just how that just helps so much.
Yeah, especially over like Slack or something where you don't have the inflection of your voice. It's like such a small thing. I think like working remotely, I've just been like overly polite over Slack, just so
smiley. Nice.
It's a lot of emojis.
Yeah.
I love those emojis.
Yeah, they help a lot, I think, to give.
Especially when it's people you don't know already, right? Like if I'm working with a friend remote and I just send off a message like, "Hey, your model's garbage," like the elbow's wrong, whatever. Like we know each other and we know what that context is. But if it's like a group of people and there's like a supervisor on the thread, you don't want to just like shove someone out into like you don't want to just throw them under the bus because like you need something from them to do your job better. You have to you need to request exactly like what you need based on your problem so that they can help you solve it versus even just telling them, hey, I want this. It's like, right, I have this problem, the arms, hey, everything's hanging down and I can't get the arm down. You're like, can you fix this? Like, do you have what's your solution even? It's not even like, please do this. It's like, hey, please help me figure this out. And that usually
make
helps.
it a dialogue instead of like
right, because you both want a good character in the end. It's not, you know, you don't want the animator going, hey, your rig is junk. It's like, hey, I'm trying to get this pose. Oh, you know what? I have this control here, versus like, your rig's broken, your model's junk.
I think it can go down like to boil down to the communication, like a good communication. And when I mean good communication is not talking a lot, but each other listen the other one and acknowledge and try to find a balance between the needs, and there is all like and the what we can be do, the often the time constraints. There is a many like points to this situation that you need to acknowledge and like agree with between.
Honestly, in more than, I mean, all of the consulting jobs that I've done, it's almost always a communication thing first. It's just like, you guys need to be talking to each other. You're struggling and you're frustrated, but it's because you're not communicating.
Well, you and I have had that conversation a lot since we started. Since you went out into the world. And
it's like, so you're going
the Pixar nest.
Well, it's been interesting. Like, consulting for me has been very interesting because I have a different perspective on like how to solve some of these problems. So when I go into these studios, I go, why are you doing it that way? And it's always a question of, honestly, like, I don't understand. And then you realize, oh, they haven't thought about these other things, or they haven't put these two dots together.
And I think that's for me, and for, you know, you and I have had these conversations about consulting and how you approach. Again, if I'm coming in from the outside to work with someone or to teach someone, I didn't need to like undo or fix or change things just so I feel good, like, oh, I was of value. I need to discover what's going on. I need to discover what the actual problems are. Is it a technique issue? Is it technology issue? Is it a communication issue, right? Are the animators just not telling the tech that they've been working around these problems every day for months? And you're like, hey, you're down the hall, go talk to them. And they're like, no, this is just the way it is. And you're like, no, I see that that's the problem. Let's go fix it. And you go down there and the tech guys are like, I didn't know that. No one told me. So, you know, it's the communication, but it's also the discovery of having the time to do it. And I think the problem of, you know, legacy assets, as we talked about before, is, you know, you may get an asset that you're like, why was it rigged this way? I don't, you know, this is frustrating, but it's also the context and the situation that led to that state is rarely with the, you know, it doesn't travel with it. There are no comments in the code. It's like, well, I don't know what constraints on time or budget or resources or experience led to this final asset, but this is what I have to work with. And so, you know, you can complain about it a bunch, or you can just, you know, see if there's a way to solve it. And the same thing for consulting. You can go into a company and go, well, okay, we should do all this stuff. And it's like, well, you have one person that's not a coder that is rigging and doing their best. And the animator is, you know, looking at cool stuff and wishing that they could, you know, and you're like, you have to figure out what you have as resources and raw materials, and then meet them where they are to make it better.
And you go into these situations where everybody is incredibly talented and smart. Like everybody. There's no slackers in here. But there's something out of sync, and you're like, all right, how can I help bring things back into sync? How can I?
And production time very rarely allows self-reflection.
Yep.
Games especially is like, why aren't you done with this asset and character pack? We are shipping something. And commercial work is like, well, this thing has got a marketing deadline, and, you know, Pixar is like, well, we're just doing whatever, whenever. Disney's going to release the movie sometime in the summer, you know.
The time frames certainly are different.
Yeah.
Do you think that people, when they are missing that like puzzle piece, and you come in, you're like, you're missing this piece, and they're like, they don't connect the dots. Do you think that happens because like they're in like their world with their problems, and they don't like, they see like, it's almost like tunnel vision but accidental?
Yeah.
Well, also there's a cultural there's a cultural thing too. The last couple of places I've been were visual effects studios that were going into animation. So there's like this embedded mindset of when you're, and Brad alluded to it, it's like, I've got this rig, it's only going to be around for 2 weeks or 2 months. It doesn't matter what kind of duct tape and
like
bowing wire.
Philosophy.
They don't care. There's no common naming. There's no normalized values for controls. There's like, I'm never worried about this thing leaving this one thing. And if I have to fix it, you know, frame by frame at the end, who cares? And then you're like, well, now you've got 15 characters and 1,800 shots and 100 animators. It's not going to work this way. You need consistency. You need to make sure, you know, and it's like, it's a mindset shift. And also the last one I've been in, because they came from a Visual X standpoint, they would sit quietly and not offer ideas.
Right.
Because in a place where you're getting paid by the hour, you don't offer up or do anything extra, because that's something you bill a client. So there's this idea that I'm not going to speak up, even though you've got a better answer. I'm not going to explore a better solution, because if I do that, I get in trouble because I can't bill that to the client.
That is so sad.
Detangling that idea of you are now part of a big mission, and you're making things better actually helps you and your studio and your product, because it's your product now. And like that's a mind shift. It's like just they don't know how to think about it. And you have to kind of break that.
Yeah, I see that at my studio when people come from VFX, they come in my studio and they're like, it's a breath of fresh air that I can like go and talk to my animator like right here.
Yeah.
Like they couldn't talk to their animator before because they had to talk to their supervisor, and then the supervisor talks to the animation supervisor and the animation supervisor. And like they're like, it actually he feels my one coworker, he was telling me like it's just like it is a change of mindset, but it's like for him it was nice because like he didn't have to, he had like more job security because he works like at Riot, and yeah, he like the goal was to make a good product. It wasn't to like for him to be in a bubble, not give away any secrets that he knows. It's to like share, like collaborate, and then it all like funnels into one product and like it becomes more collaborative. And for me, that's like super fun. Like that's like the environment that I like personally.
Yeah.
It's weird that it's so culturally like the studio culture kind of it builds on itself and creates its own problems. It's like its own little weather system.
That's why, Alicia, you're so powerful at your job, though, is you can help make the culture right. You got people talking to each other. I love listening to you talk about peer review, and it's like you can make your team better. And
that was really cool.
I loved it.
Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Thank you. It's interesting. Like it's like you say, it's really sad to hear that, you know, like someone coming from a VFX background, like not being able to like speak and not being able to, not even not being able to, but not wanting to, like not feeling as though they like. That's kind of sad.
It was like I guess it was like a protocol thing.
Yeah.
But
like it's the culture.
Like even the culture can be just through one person, right? Like you can have a supervisor that doesn't feel like they want to interact with the other teams, and or they don't feel like. I've never had a problem with this of going into a studio and just getting answers, right? Like when I worked wherever, I'm like, okay, the first person I'm going to make friends with is the IT department or person, because they are the ones that are the keys to the castle. Do I have a computer? Do I have software? Like IT is first. I want software. I need stuff installed. I need scripts deployed. Like they are that's who is my best friend first. And everyone beyond that, my supervisor, whatever, if there's someone that I need an answer from, I don't want to step on the hierarchy toes, but I also I've never been afraid to go, how do I get this answer? And again, it's not like I need this answer. I do, but also how do we make this better for everybody?
Yeah.
And how do I communicate this? Because if I'm asking, and it's the same way with teaching online, right? Like if one student asks a question and messages me, it's like, well, yeah, 3 other people have that problem, but you're embarrassed to ask it. Yeah, no, we're all idiots, right? We're all fumbling around trying to get the answer. And if I share it or I ask the question, I don't know, I'm new here, or I've been here forever and I don't know why we do it this way, right? So just being brave enough to go ask the question and find out who has the answer and who can answer it is important. And if you're at a culture where the boss or the leadership says, you know, you guys need to stay in your silos and go through hierarchy, that's fine. But before COVID, you still had lunches, right? You could still go to lunch with the animation and go outside of the chain of command and shop talk through issues that come back. And I think that's one of the harder things with remote work is those moments of interaction between departments that aren't through proper channels.
Yeah.
The problem with that is when that happens, though, things don't get fixed beyond that one time. So that, the animator asked the TD one time and they fix their problem, but 4 other animators or another team somewhere has the same issue and they don't have that solution. So, I think encouraging that kind of environment makes sense to make sure people are talking to each other, but you have to, again, it comes back to do it constructively.
Yeah.
Do you think this culture it's attached to certain type of like places? Like I always felt like, for instance, the VFX. I always try to avoid VFX studios. Well, apart of all this news that pops from time to time and all these fights on the budget, things like that. Horrible news from time. I never see like really really great, and then. The other, I will say, side of the spectrum will be the studios like Pixar or that they create, or Riot, that they create his own IP. So the goal is not offer cheaper, faster, better, but there is another values, another goals, and in between, I always see it in between. I don't think I've never been in maybe, but like in between there is all this spectrum that can vary depending of the studio or the culture inside the studio. What do you think this is? I mean, it's like that. Do you think it's like that, or there can be a end of a spectrum? Let's say that is VFX, but it's depends on the place. Can be very open and very a lot like this kind of synergies, or in the other side, very close place that they do his own stuff, but nobody say anything. It's like
I think it's complicated. I mean. I have horror stories of people working in animation studios with plenty of money and it's still terrible and political. And then places in visual effects where they feel comfortable and they're jamming, they're listening to music out loud and loving every second of it. It's like, I think the leadership is a big, big part of it. I grew up with my dad being an entrepreneur. Like I grew up watching my dad build businesses and I worked for him. And you start learning, it's like, these guys are in their money. Like, when you think about how hard I watched him work to keep business, work in the business. So I had a really interesting perspective in that. And so to me, when I go to a place like I look at the top and you go, who's in charge? Because that really does their sensibility, the way they treat people, the idea, it percolates down. And then, like it's, do not sell. And that early part of the conversation, right? Just because you're a great artist doesn't mean you're a great leader. Right. And like, this idea of you should have managers and supervisors that are good with people and then have an understanding of the process. And like, so it's complicated, right? I worked at a place which was a fun place, but my supervisor was terrible and I left because I didn't like the way I was treated, but everybody else had a great time. Like it was, so I was in a small department that was poorly managed, so I don't know.
One of the things that for me, like, I think there's a difference in why VFX maybe in general just kind of gets singled out a little bit, but it's you have a large group of people that assemble for a service, right? You take a bunch of people that are moving nomadically from one project to the next that don't really have any loyalties to the studio or to the coworkers they're with necessarily. Like, it's not that and not in a bad way, it's just that you may have a supervisor that you work with that you like and he hires you for the next project, but a lot of those studios are basically built on demand, right? You have the core group, but everyone else comes in from all over with different issues and different experiences and relationships and friendships. And then 6 months later, they're gone, right? So you don't even have time to build that kind of cohesive network and like a culture at the studio. So you just come into whatever is expected from you. And so, your coworker may have worked at a studio where they kept it siloed so that they could manage and keep track of the pods of people they pull in and let go easily, right? You don't want to muddy the waters if one person's going to be there for 2 months and then gone. Like, you just need to be able to replace those people, but everything else needs to be tracked and managed in the hierarchy and stay clean. So I think it varies. Like at Weta, when I went down there for the mocap stuff, I was like in a different building and sidelined off from like where everybody else is, and I came in at a time when it was just a rush of people. So even if I walked over and went, where is everybody? I want to go meet people and find people. And I just went over and started looking at stuff. And that's when I started realizing like where our data was getting thrown out. And, and you're just like, all these people are doing a lot of work for that rig setting to just turn that off. And, again, it wasn't malice, or it was just like they had a problem, they fixed it, but it never made it back up the chain or across the building or to the other, so everyone's working really hard at the top of their game. Yeah. And then you see in compositing a blur, and then it's all covered up and you're just like.
I always hear like animators work on something and then I'm like, how's the rig going? And they're like, it's okay. But I have this one problem. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me about it? And they're like, we don't want to bother you. Like,
right. And
yeah,
it starts to feed on itself. And one little problem's not a big deal, but like, a year into something long term and all the rigs have this problem, that's a bigger deal.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's, you have this like nomadic culture problem of like people just coming in and out all the time. So you don't have like a Pixar that you're there for life, right? Like, it's, or even just a 3-year project, or it's, a longer term thing. It's just, we need 100 people on this now. And then next week they're gone. And they'll run over somewhere else. And, like a cartoon pile of like termites just eating wood, right? They just, here, and then move to the next. But it's, those relationships among people go between the projects, but the studio culture, it's harder to create kind of a cohesive team that way. So, game studios are kind of on almost that same way. For Austin, like everybody worked at the same studio at different times. And when one studio would go under, they'd all pop back up and reform a new team, like Voltron Lions or something, like, we're a game studio again. And they work really hard and they all know each other. And then the studio would disappear after the project, or, part of it would break off and form a new group. And then they'd kind of migrate people over. So you ended up with the same people over and over again with slightly different managers and groups. But it was a cohesive culture to Austin, like that, because people didn't want to leave. So again, I think it's complicated, right? Everyone has a different but I think there are some more systemic reasons why, just because the way that the service industry is versus an IP company versus like a short film, they all have their own culture because of the style of project.
I've worked at places where like it was our own IP, which sometimes can be good and sometimes can be bad, right?
Yeah, it's not a magic.
Right. And I've worked at places where like it was that was a client, and whatever the client wanted, that's what it was. And then you have clients that are more flexible, which is cool. So yeah, I just learned over time that it's especially like your own IP, like you would assume with your own IP, it's the company's money, they it's more easy, I guess. And that's not, I'm sure you guys have experienced this too, it's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
So
budgets are still budgets.
Yeah.
Right?
And personalities and political, I think that with IP it can, the creator vision thing becomes a little bit tricky if it gets a little too like, well, this is my vision and it's supposed to be a certain way. But I mean, that's kind of anything, right? Like any kind of artistic project, you need constraints and you need creative drive and vision, but you also need the flexibility to like trust the other people that are helping you make it. And I think for the game industry for a long time, the publisher studio relationship was really terrible for a lot of places. And everyone treated the other, like, it was just never mutual respect. It was always like, hey, you're supposed to make this thing for us. It's like giving feedback for the rig. You're just supposed to make a rig and I'm an anime. You're just supposed to make a game, like that's not, it's so much work and so many people have to come together that if you don't trust those people to actually do the work and you kind of micromanage from like another country, another town, another city about the creative process, it becomes really hard. And the flip side of that is the people on the receiving end of that get scared to say anything. They're like, oh no, they've got the money. They said do this. This is just what we're doing. We're working all weekend for 5 weeks. You're like, why? Yeah. Well, I don't want to say anything. Well, no, just speak up. You know, what are you doing? Speak
this sort
up
of
and
leads into you know, kind of what we were talking about beforehand online. It's like now we're seeing this convergence, because I'm new to games. Like that is a new thing for me, not counting the 90s when I was doing stuff with DOS games. But, you know, before video cards. But like, to me, this is a new world, right? Like now there's this convergence where the tools that I'm building for visual effects and film are being used in games now. Like that's where we are. The game engines are for final rendering. Like I'm supporting 2 different Netflix series that are rendering in Unreal, but rigging in Maya. And so like for me now, there's this weird, messy, awesome, because it's interesting, convergence of these 2 worlds. And I wonder how the publisher, game studio, film studio, like it's all this. We're in exciting times, and every couple of decades you get this like bomb go off where all of a sudden now the rules are different. So it's an interesting time for sure.
I'm very interested to talk about this topic with you guys, because for me it's now like this like inflection point in time, like where I think from now on it's gonna be changes on the character rigging or tech art for characters process, because there is new players coming to this like field, like in this case, like I will name Unreal and Unity basically. And I think, well, Blender was always there, but I think it's also getting traction now. But each one of these let's say platforms, they have its own way to do the rigging, and they bring new concepts to the table, some old concepts, some new concepts. Also Maya is getting really, I mean, it's evolving a lot. And we have also Houdini. They have this new KineFX thing that I'm very excited also, because I think there is real, like, before, like any, like say any advantage, it's worth to change to something. Like before was like, a little bit, but okay, my Blender does this and Maya does that. It's worth to learn another package, all what investment time it's needed just for a little thing. But now it's like you say, exploding. Like it's
like everything. There's explosions of people are picking up parts all over the place, and they're trying to figure out how they want to do it.
At the same time, all this stuff is moving into the engine itself, right? Like you can build the constraints on the rig in Unity and stack the constraints and have the order of operations and layers and twist bones, and then give that control to the code so that they can run all those controls. We're in Unreal, the control rig now, right?
Yeah,
like
the 4.26.
It has the same NLA capability, motion builder. You can bake animation to the rig and bake the rig animation back to the skeleton. You can sequence it. You can expose the rig to real-time manipulation. You know, if you've got a character interacting on a set, now you've got full control of them. You don't have to wait and offline it through motion builder and then come back. The director can, you know, go, I like this monster, and then lift his arm up, right? Like you can throw a VR helmet on and manipulate the character in context, and you're not an animator rigger, you're the director. You want to see the vision. So it's spreading out the decision making, but it's also removing, or it's starting to move around where the decisions can be made. And when
we had some good deformers,
and then add final deformers and rendering there, and you don't have to skin everything to bones, right?
Oh my gosh!
If you haven't seen Ozone stuff yet, it's worth checking out. But I think, you know, the same. This kind of loops back when I started looking at Blender. It had some of the same ideas, right? You're like, oh, Maya has the same concepts as all this. Like they all kind of generically seem the same.
Yeah.
And then you actually dig in and go, nope, they didn't understand what they were doing with this tool. It doesn't, having the feature checked, having the advanced rig feature checked, doesn't mean it's useful to the animator. It doesn't mean that the feature works. And what I really liked, because, you know, full disclosure, I consulted with Houdini guys on the KineFX stuff. I've been I found the random collection of Blender developers that were working to make add-ons and improve the core code, and I basically just harassed them a little bit nicely. I'm like, hey, you're working
Nice
on this.
harassment.
Let me help you understand how to actually make this time of value, right? So now the Blender nonlinear animation tools are starting to function in the way that you'd expect and be usable. And you see the same stuff and you're like, okay, well now you really do have the same ideas. The time editor, nonlinear animation, motion capture sources, and all this stuff is starting to basically feel the same now, no matter what software. And now once that happens, you're back at a level of education for the creator. You can make whatever rig you want, and if they only use the 1-foot control because that's what they know and that's what they trust, you're never going to expand your functionality either. Like even if your rig is your advanced rig is, it gives you really cool deformation functionality, but they don't trust it, right? You can't make fragile tools, because then they won't use them.
I have a question on this topic. I think it's right now we are in this I think like new brave world of transition, or where we are in between. I know now, for instance, all these new pipelines where it's been for a few years now, like you do the rigging and animation in Maya, you bring to Unreal or Unity to render. Now they are adding these new rigging character, like nonlinear animation tools and things. So right now we're still in this process of transitioning or to moving from one to another. Now it comes Houdini with these skin effects that opens a ton of possibilities, I think, for many points of view. So do you think now we are in a transition where will we move from one like way to do the things to another, like probably moving to full for one application? Or do you think we will keep like for this ecosystem where the unification of pipeline, like with USD, Alembics, VX, or whatever it comes, will be a
no
pick and
simple
choose?
questions from you, Miguel.
The one word answer to all of that is the creators will stay where they want and are comfortable. So we are rigging and animation are still going to get crushed under rendering and modeling and assembly, right? No one's going to assemble a giant virtual scene in Maya when you can build it in Unreal with gigascans and walk around in it. And you're over in Maya like, I hope I don't crash. It's just not going to happen. But are you going to get an animator who's animated Maya and has legacy history of using those tools for 20 years to jump into Unreal? Probably not. Or jumped into Blender? No. And the same thing with people using Studio Max. Like Biped is an inferior product all around, and yet it still is faster and better to jump into that and use Studio Max Biped than it is to try to spend 4 days hooking up an animator in Maya to barely get the same functionality.
Yeah, I was
like,
gonna say.
Just go back to Biped.
I was gonna say, like our entire pipeline is based on Maya and our proprietary engine that we're now adding. Like we didn't have engine programmers for a bit, and we are now like trying to update our engine, and it's not even Unreal. Like it doesn't have Unreal like stuff. So the like titanic task of even thinking about shifting like our software to something else when we already have like so much pipeline built, that is like
it is
difficult.
Like,
and our game doesn't end. That's the thing. Like it's not
you
like
have legacy for years.
It's not like we're gonna like stop. Like we have to like keep our game going. So
but it'll be different for anyone who's not used to it, right?
I think it'll have to take like, what I'm imagining in games is it'll take like an indie developer who's like getting into games or like something, and he finds like the new resources with new tools, and he or she or whatever, like they start playing around with those tools and they build something awesome, and then it becomes successful, and then everybody jumps on that thing. So it's not going to come from like Riot where we're like
Well, also it seems like now people are more willing to use specialized tools for specialized tasks. That it seemed like everybody wanted the Uber app, and then now it's like you can go into ZBrush and get amazing sculpting. You can go into UV tools that are the best tools out there for that. And it seems, at least looking here, it's like there's more willingness to jump into something for a specialized task and come back out.
I think the difference is, sorry to cut you off, I think the difference is that you're going to see less people getting stuck, right? That's, you know, it's not that you're like, oh, you know what, only Maya can do this and I have to go back there to do this stuff. It's like, well, you're not cutting off iteration once you leave the software anymore. If you're like, oh, you know what, I need to feed all this animation to Houdini for crowds. Well, okay, if the animation team on Maya has moved on and you've got all this asset data, you don't have to then go dig up Maya and figure out how to do something with it. You have the tools where you are. And I think that used to be a big problem. And I think that's the change, is that if I'm an indie developer and I've paid for a bunch of mocap and edited and I have the stuff in my game engine, and I really just want to change some stuff, I can have an animator fix it in Unreal, or I can play with it in Unreal, and I'm not having to start the iteration loop all the way back at the beginning. And I think that's the big change. And I think any of the teams will still have a core software, but rendering and modeling for the long time, they don't, you know, you're not stuck in Maya, they're in ZBrush and giving you stuff. And rendering, you're rendering wherever you want. You alembic out, or you cache it, or, you know, whatever. It goes to whatever rendering engine. The content creation was still stuck in its, you know, you have M-Gear rigged Maya rig, and that's where you have to go back to if you want to fix the animation. You don't. You can load it in Houdini if you have a Houdini guy that can fix the stuff, or bake it to the control rig in Unreal and fix it and animate it and you know, change it a little bit because you have a different character model. That you're unisolating where the creativity can continue.
I think so. And it, like, this kind of, like, you will choose the right tool, and it will be not the right tool for instance, I don't think animation, but it depends which kind of change or edit you want to do. Probably you will stay on Unreal, do certain thing, or it's more complex. Maybe you want to bring back or go back to for instance Maya or Blender, where you have a more probably complex rig and tools to support the rig, like animation tools I'm talking, where you can do more easily these edits and bring it back. So it depends where is your battle. You will choose your field.
It should be really interesting to see how this evolves, because it almost feels like eventually you're going to be able to live in one big Uber place again. like it's like it'll be interesting to see. There will be people that literally will go into, say, Unreal or Unity and just to do all their work there. Like I can see a future where that's the case,
and that should be valid. And if that's where they're comfortable and fastest, and they don't have to leave their creative environment, that's awesome. But if you want to scale a team to 100, do you want a bunch of people trying to all load up Unreal and animate in context? Maybe not. You know, you need to create a bunch of assets that are constrained in some way, or, you know, standardized. Like, you know, you're not gonna have the time to cross train 100 animators to animate in Houdini. But the one guy sitting in Motion Builder that was doing all the work that no one knew about can now expand that to maybe the other 3 Houdini effects guys and go, hey, can you run this batch on, you know, all these motion clips? Or, you know, hey, there's a bunch of Blender animators that are awesome, but they've never used Maya. Well, I can now use them because I trust that I can get an FBX in and out of the tool, and they can use the same, you know, they can rig it however they want, but I get a skeleton back. Or, you know, I'm not stuck in Motion Builder. I mean, really, my last 10 years probably now, I guess, has been like, well, Autodesk doesn't support Motion Builder in a way that I trust. And I've worked directly with them to try to move away from it. And it didn't work, right? They haven't moved enough into Maya to make that software go away. And so I was like, okay, wait, what? Well, it still doesn't have support. So where do I go? And to me, that's where I see, when I talk about like not being limited at where you can create, like if I'm stuck in Motion Builder because it's still the only tool that does the thing I need, then that is a really rough place to be, because it's getting less and less support, and it is specialized and it's powerful and it's still used everywhere. But I can't get more people to help me if I can't even trust that the software is going to work well, you know? But now I've done enough in Blender. I'm like, hey, you know what? 4 people in Blender that I can teach how to do some motion editing, I can get them working now, and I'm not stuck. So, you know, or Houdini, right? I can now, like, I don't need to worry that I can't process 200-300 moves. and retarget it and edit it, and worry that I have to wait on Maya to open up 400 hours of my life to just watch it file open and bake. Like, I don't need that. But Houdini can just burn through it now, and so could Motion Builder. And it's removing me feeling trapped in a content tool. I think that's a really powerful thing to see what people are going to do with that when they are no longer feeling stuck. Like, you have to commit to a software because it's so expensive and takes so long to learn, and then you don't feel secure in leaving it. But now if it's close enough in engine, in context to lighting and what my game's doing, I don't feel so bad, right? I'm not making this time precious. I can throw away that time and go, yeah, that was a sketch, or that was good enough. It gave me the techniques I need, and I'm going to play here in Unreal or in Unity or wherever. So, I think the same thing Rich has done with Ozone. He took all the stuff he's been doing and playing with and moved it to a new playground that is expandable and your own. And and you're not tied to like the one place that you could do it before. You're like, hey, I want to share this with everybody. Let's take this idea that's stuck in Modo or stuck in Pixar and go, hey, let's play with this process of layering deformers in a new way, and everyone can play.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to see how everything and where it's going, and it really feels like now, 2 years later, for me, that Unreal is the 10,000-pound gorilla in the industry right now. It's like everybody is exploring it in some way or using it in some way, and it's been very interesting. And we're doing our own projects too, just testing and playing and kind of making our own little shorts with it. And it's like, I'm getting amazing results out of this thing. You're like, it's winning for a reason. It's like, it's crazy, but it does feel like a big bag of options where you can do whatever you want, including destroy yourself in the process of turning settings on and off. So there's there's not a lot of great education for the nuts and bolts stuff. Like, we're like finding our John Moore who's doing all of our lighting and shading and is a cinematographer. He's up in Toronto. He's having to deconstruct his RenderMan knowledge and convert that into how he's doing shaders in Unreal. And it took him like 6 months, but then I saw the light go on. All of a sudden, amazing work shows up, and it was kind of this whole tech debt of how do I translate my 20 years experience into this new way? And now it's like he's off to the races, but it's definitely not super easy to get there.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
As far as because I only have experience with Unreal, and I know some of you guys too. It was interesting for me, like going to SIGGRAPH, I think 3 years ago. Well, 5 years ago, there was nothing about Unreal. There was nothing about game engines. It was really just pre-rendered solutions. And then I would say 3 years ago, you kind of saw a little bit Unreal and Unity. And I'm saying 2 years ago, it was like I came back and I was like, so there's an arms race going on between Unity and Unreal.
Oh yes.
Like, because it was like two specific hallways, and they were like, the talks were rammed. And so for me, my only experience with Unity is like last year I did like a 1 hour, like, oh, this is how I rig an arm, like little course. But like, I don't know if you guys have experience with Unity. Like, I would like to hear your opinion.
Well, I can share mine. I don't have really any game experience at all. So for me, it's new. And we got a mega grant, so we have stayed in the Unreal space. I'm like, not that there were any strings, but I'm like, you know what? I think we're gonna focus on Unreal. But we have some clients now that are like, yeah, we do everything in Unity. So now I'm having to get like, okay, we gotta port this thing over. And it feels sort of like, how to describe it from my point of view. I'll use the Moto Maya one for me. That's a personal one, right? Where you get into this a tool that's sort of designed for an individual artist. That's kind of everything kind of sort of works, but you always hit like 80%, and getting that last 20 hurts a lot. And that's sort of where Moto felt with me, right? Which is like, I didn't have to think about a lot of stuff. Everything kind of worked for the way it needed. Where Maya was like, man, I don't even know how to make the basic stuff work, but it's unlimited. I never was unable to hit 100. And I feel like Unity and Unreal are like that to me. Like, Unity feels like you get a lot of stuff, it just sort of works. But the pain threshold of getting all the way to where you need is much higher. Where Unreal, it's like, it's kind of the Wild West and everything's all over the place, but I know I can get anything I want out of it. So that's kind of my point of view or feeling is like, it's sort of like they have a different target almost, you know, individual game developer, 2 or 3 people versus a team of however many.
And so Unity, like when it originally started, its target audience were the indies, the indie game developers, and it was like, you know, 1 person to 5 people big. And I believe the last time I used Unity was like 5 years ago, but I think Unity is not open source. Is that still true? Well, you can't open their source code and like
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so and Unreal
it's not at the same level of Unreal is
so that was like the biggest difference for me is that like when I was working at a studio with Unity, we we're kind of limited to what we can edit and like I mean Unity gave us tools and that's it, and if you found like plugins, that's great, but like sometimes they're not supported and whatever. Whereas like I worked at a studio with Unreal, and we would have engineers like literally edit the engine specifically for a game. So it was just more power to us, even though we were indie. So Unity came in the scene, they were geared at indies, and that was before Unreal. I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, before Unreal made their engine available to the public.
I don't remember exactly. They were so close and
they were very close.
I mean, it was an arms race. Like, oh, hey, we got this, we got this, and it felt like very much like Max and Maya before that, when it was still Alias and Autodesk, where it's like they were fighting about who could model the spaceship faster, and then it was like, well, the modeling tools are contextual, and you can do so much as an individual artist, but you can't file reference or share stuff in Max, or Maya, you wouldn't hit a limit. You'd hit the limit of what you could do of your own ability faster than you'd hit maybe the software not letting you do something. And in Max, you would hit that wall and need to plug in early. Now it's a little, obviously, like both of them, again, it's back to like whatever you want to do pretty much. But for the most part, I think for me, watching the Unreal Unity stuff, and most of the game engine stuff I had ever done was proprietary. So, much like the Riot engine, it's like, this engine does exactly what I need. And it's exactly for the type of game we need. And we don't want to carry the overhead of an unlimited type of environment, which is Unreal, right? Unreal is like, you do whatever you want, and it provides a platform for a wide variety of games. And I feel like, what's weird is on the motion side of things, I know Unity took most of the motion builder people. Like the way that their Mechanum animation retargeting is like, my friend that was writing the control rig for Motion Builder, like that's where his software went. And so then they pulled a bunch of people from Motion Builder, like all the people working on the new constraints and real-time rigging, like David Hunt from Bungie, and all these really like animation programming tech artist people went to Unity, and the Autodesk people went to Unreal. So you see like a lot of people in Unreal on that side of things that were like driving the giant behemoth of Autodesk to consume software, and you see that. I also think too, gobbling up software to expand Unreal, but also they opened it up more than Autodesk corporate would let them. It felt like.
I think when Kim Libreri went over there too, like all of a sudden a huge cinematic mindset dropped into Unreal too. Because then all of a sudden you're like, okay, now like you've got camera settings like you're a cinematographer on a set. So I think some of where we are in pushing into this visual effects using Unreal for that is all because of that move, or at least
I worked
one of the moves.
I worked on a project early on that was trying to use Unreal to render stuff, and it was like, a bunch of VFX people are like, I don't know how to rig and only export joints. It's like, oh yeah, like it's a game, it's a game industry. You're gonna have to just.
I know about some of the pain because of our mutual friend Sergio.
So it was like early on, it was like, how do I? And I felt the same way when I was working with a bunch of people that like didn't know Motion Builder. How do you get rigging over to it? Well, luckily Maya talks to it, but it's still, you have to treat it like a game engine. You're not going to get bunch of surface deformers, so but you're real time. 20 years ago you were real time. You've been real time all the time, so there's a reason that it's limited, but I still have, yeah, you get a nice rig and Maya might play fast, and on my 10-year-old laptop, Motion Builder still is real time, and I can hit play and hit 60 frames a second. So, you know, you trade that stuff off. But I think in that same trade-off, like that's why I think the appeal to working on Unreal is interesting, because it is real time and it's in context, and it's what makes, I'm working on a short film in Blender, and my discussion with the artist who's kind of assembling the look of the shots is like, right, I don't want to do animation until lighting. And you have the lighting based on, like, we know that this shot is lighting dependent. I'm not going to do a bunch of animation in flat shaded and then see it covered up by shadow. Like, that's ridiculous. That's a waste of both our time. So we're going to light the shot and we're going to proxy it up and set it up and get the final look. And then we'll do some animation to it, because it's real time in viewport. It's contextual.
Yeah, it really seems like that's the big push for the visual effects studios, right? Like getting to see your shot in context in real time is huge for the money savers, right? Like,
well, that was Pixar's pitch, right? Presto and Primo both, like DreamWorks and Pixar both, like, hey, real-time lighting in the viewport, shadows, like.
Wow, you know what's funny though is like I felt like the watching the industry do all these really interesting advances, you know, and like getting just textures in the viewport and Presto took, you're like, it's like it took so long. It's kind of the reason Hydra exists, right? But it's like in some ways so advanced and so ahead, in other ways way behind, like because, well, this is just the way we did it, and animators were fine, and you know, we didn't have to worry about it. But
FK it.
It's just it's really interesting though, like that. But this real-time filmmaking really is affecting all of us in a really interesting way. Like I think like this is where the innovation, everything's happening now in this space, so it's fun to be a part of it too, but it's also scary, you know. We engaged our first real game client, and I'm like, how many milliseconds do I have per character?
Oh my god, it's so funny. You're like, hearing these stories like from a game perspective, I'm like I see like the VFX people like coming into like game engines and stuff. I'm like, I see you. I see what you're trying to do with my engine.
I'm just like, what?
You're trying to make a movie? That's
good. Like, on the other hand, though, like we're solving a problem, and like I can go into Maya and get like real time, like really complex stuff running in real time, because it's fine for visual effects and not fine for games yet. So it's and
I think, you know, it's a balance, because I think, you know, it's not just final rendering though, right? Like, if you know how many studios came out with VR projects with their film, like Weta came out with the Smog experience, and you're like looking at the dragon, but they're like, okay, well, we have this like incredible dragon that is the most complex realistic thing, and now we need to look at it in VR and not have it look like Ralph Bakshi's version from drawn in like.
Do you know this the Maze Runner director,
Wes Ball?
Yeah. Do you know him? He was working on this mice movie that was canceled or something. That they posted some like behind the scenes. Cool. He put like some, and I think I listened to him in a podcast. I don't know, but I saw it on internet. It's there. They was doing all these previs with Unreal, with all VR, and I think they post somewhere like he posted a video like saying goodbye to all the environment, all the development thing, and so show some stuff.
But that's the stuff that now you can do at home with a VR headset that like Weta set up for Peter Jackson on the first Lord of the Rings, right? Like he was, you know, the first cave troll scene was so groundbreaking because it was like, oh, you're mocapping a camera, but he's filming his own CG characters in the environment that, you know, the scale is correct, and he's making the camera decisions as the director, referencing that stuff. Cool. And now all of us could do it with a Sony PlayStation, right? Like you can make that same thing. And then when DreamWorks was like starting to use mocap for cameras, it's like, oh, your camera moves feel so much better. Or Sony did for Surf's Up, right? Like they started doing these like handheld cam action mocap cameras.
I love Surf's Up.
It was so good. Like I still love that whole film was amazing. But like you start to realize that like stuff that it was only accessible to the top studios with unlimited budgets to do this simple like hand cam, and now you can get like an app for Maya for your iPhone and do the same thing at home. And it's incredible. So I think that's the other part of this, is that you see more creative possibilities at all levels instead of just the, you know, flying to New Zealand and spending.
You also see a lot more bad stuff, right? It's
Well,
like
sure.
people have the tools
But-
that they can just make bad art too.
But
Of course, but that's part of the process.
I think this is like, maybe I'm wrong, but trying to guess for the future. Do you remember, like, back in, I think in the 80s and 90s, was this like high spec scripts that you can get the movie done with a nice script presentation and crazy thing, and then this thing went away, and some point in the early 2000s there was this people does this nice like concept trailers for a movie, and some of them were picked, and I don't know if everybody was developed, but it was like a trend a few years ago where some people was doing super nice like trailers, and
like pitch trailers
pitch trailers, and the company was like just getting the rights because it was so viral, the trailer. They didn't, some went and didn't they make it, and some didn't, but it was there. Huh?
I feel like
that happened for Deadpool.
Well, Deadpool was a little different,
like,
I think.
Leaked.
Leaked.
Yeah.
But
actual trailer, but like that's how.
But they Blue Camp, it did with District 9. I think it is I Live in Japan.
Yeah.
And I think the next wave will be people doing the full movie, real time thing, not with the like top quality, but something that you can go and pitch. This is the movie, final movie. And if it's good, okay, let's up-res.
It's animatic, but like finished shots.
Yeah, finished. like this is the montage. Because if you have this and you like it or not, maybe probably you don't need to. I mean, the amount of money that can go just replace these shots by the high res version of this.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be a wave on that in the future.
Well, I think that like everyone making bad stuff, right? But the difference is that you can, if you're an artist now and you go grab a box of crayons and make art, you haven't committed to 12 years of learning to mix pigments.
Yeah.
Right. The barrier to entry.
I was being playful.
Yeah, but people will be able to experiment with that stuff without having a giant barrier to entry. And so there's going to be a lot of junk in general, just because that's part of the process, right? There's 1,000 bad drawings to get to the good one. But those barriers of entry are my son at age 10 sitting down in Blender and drawing a 3-minute hand animation with grease pencil, and it's like a cohesive story, and he did it in a weekend, right? Like it's like,
it's cool.
I didn't at that age, I couldn't finish a project, and he's got Procreate on an iPad, and he's able to do like art designs and do like I don't have to spend like time teaching him how to save files on Windows and learn Photoshop and manage like all of the junk that comes with just drawing something, because the iPad removes that barrier, and the software just lets you create something, and then you put it on internet and sell it or whatever it is, right? So I think the next 10 years, because it's going to be slower than you actually want it to be, but I think just like your M Gear rig showing up in Roomba, right? Like it's a shared the shared experience is you're going to want to animate something, and instead of having to go, man, I really wish I learned, now I have to sit down and learn Maya, you just grab whatever is available and just do something. And in the weekend short film camp that used to just be a 24-hour film fest on a Sony Hi8 camcorder is now going to be like real time, full immersive thing that you can share. Yeah. And it's got all the assets pulled together. And it
definitely will allow people to tell stories without technical chops, which is cool.
And it's not going to be the same as like a finished product that you go spend time in the theater with, but it's not going to be so rough and so but you look at the early stuff that like for us, anytime you go to the Alamo Draft House, you see the like early trailers of stuff of people like working on things, and then it's like, oh, Thor Ragnarok, right? Like you're like, oh, the same guy did this like weird indie short, and now he's like, and doing Mandalorian episodes, and just like all of the it's that pathway is continually removing barriers for people to be creative, and the same. And it wasn't that way 10 years ago. You're still investing a huge amount in just getting started. And if you fail, then you have a huge investment already. And so it just stopped people, right? Like I've got to have an expensive computer. You know, when I started, like, I want to do computer animation. Well, you have an Amiga and Lightwave, or $30,000 for Alias and $20,000 for an SGI that's barely powerful enough to run it. And good luck.
Pentium 90, $5,000 Pentium 90.
Yeah. And that was it, right? And now, you know, you can go get a free computer from, like, you know, Goodwill and run Blender on it and make a film. It's, you know, that's the difference of where we are. And I think you'll see that more and more with rigged assets and files, right? Like, you know, earlier on, there's the discussion of, like, you know, I have to rig this thing. I need good deformations. Like, you know, how many times do we need to rig the same set of hands and the same people? You know, modelers don't do this stuff. They have their library of stuff. They pull it up and they start with a scan or whatever. They're not starting from scratch every pixel. And yet our rigs are constantly starting from scratch. Even if we have auto rigging tools, skinning is starting from scratch because the skinning tools don't give us exactly, you know, you can look at Ziva and reuse the deformation system and reuse their puppet. And if it doesn't fit exactly right, it's still a huge investment of time to make it work. And all those barriers are still there technically. But, you know, I think if you have a good enough asset, it's close enough, people aren't going to care. They're going to assemble the stuff. They're going to make the lighting nice. They're going to communicate well with their film or their idea. No one's going to care. It's going to be like, oh, this was awesome.
Are you saying that our job's going to go away?
No, I'm saying that our job should have gone away years ago.
Well, what I'm kind of hearing too is
for the low level nonsense that we're still fighting all the time, that should have gone away 10 years ago. But it's just barely starting to erode so that you can focus on nice looking characters. Or, you know, you're like, oh, you know what? Maybe I don't need a PhD in facial muscles to make a character smile well and hand that off to an animator to create something with it, right? Like, you still need the translation. You still need someone making the paints and the brushes. You still need pigment and canvases, and you still need the technical tools of the trade. But we shouldn't have to mine the ore. And I don't need to go out and hunt down expensive cobalt to grind it up and to make a pigment for someone, you know.
Yeah, and I think here that this is a good point also to the other topic that we wanted to talk before, like the art versus tech, where these techniques, these advances, it will blend between the technical vs the artistic, and how I think we are in the middle, like really in the middle of these two, what it's technical, what it's artistic, because art can be very technical if you think about that, and tech, what we consider tech, can be very artistic. I think it's a creativity. I mean, if you define creativity, it's not like only a draw, only a picture, or only a sound. It can be many things, creativity there. So yeah, that's a very, very interesting thing for me. Like, how, I mean, if you want to create digital characters, let's say, and move it and create live in games or pre-render or whatever you decide to use as a medium, how do you think, how is the importance for you guys on this balance?
What's the audience?
What's the audience?
I mean, you know what I mean? Like, there are YouTube animations for kids that technically are 25 years ago level of rigging and nonsense, and they're millionaires, right? Like, the baby watching that doesn't matter.
Which one?
There's so many now.
There's
like,
there are so many horrifying.
Yes,
really?
but they are target audience appropriate, right? The 1-year-old does not care about deformations or timing. They just see a character talking, there's bright colors, and that's it. You know, we spend 3 years and millions of dollars and all this investment to make a character that looks slightly better than the Maya viewport to run around in, and people get tired of that game in 6 months, but you've spent all this time, right? Obviously your project's different, Izzy, because it's a legacy project. It's a living ecosystem that you're continually feeding and growing like a garden, right? It's not just a one time you published a disc and then it's gone. But, you know, I think, to me, the art and tech stuff, people get hung up on it the same way you say advanced rigging, in that if you come to me, or if I asked you guys to build an amazing character rig and I have no time and no budget, and my audience is a bunch of 12 to 12-year-old and under, their expectations of like Roblox and Minecraft is going to set what the end product can be, versus a bunch of jaded old people like me and Rich.
Well, I'm in the club.
You expect people that you expect a certain level of stuff, and you look back at films even from 10 years ago, and you're like, oh, the compositors weren't, the blacks didn't match anymore, and like whatever, like there's just a bunch of stuff that aged poorly because it didn't matter at the time.
I think it's interesting because you talk about about audience, right? Like you're talking about these horrifying animations on YouTube. I have a nephew, so as soon as he was a certain age, I was like, what do you want to watch on?
Aren't they like also like made through an AI? I've heard like there's AIs that just like
I have heard, yes.
It depends.
I've
it
heard
depends.
that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But again, like if you have a library of stuff, who cares? Like it doesn't matter. Like you could buy a set of assets that are nice enough and be done and generate content for years.
But I think the thing is that like it's very interesting when you talk about like who the audience is, right? Because when you're talking about like let's say a high-end film, it's like your art director is not 12 years old, right? Like everybody who's like these kind of films and this kind of product is not, it's for kids from a marketing point of view, right? But like it's really, sometimes I feel like it's for like us, like it's for it's for other industry people.
Yes.
Because like you want to like, oh, look how much we like push the lighting and like oh, this was so realistic that we actually had to like bring it back. Like it's not really, it is for children or it is for the general public, but it kind of isn't at the same time. Like,
and I love that though. It's like, what do you want to be doing? I just did a podcast thing this week and it was talking about rigging, and we were talking about how the mechanical side, like building the motion rig versus doing the deformation rig, and the response was, well, a simple skin wedge, you can just quick bind and you're done, and that's totally good enough. And I'm just like dying inside because I'm like,
you're like,
well, it's like the thing is that like you're right, Brad. Like for that audience, it is, and there are certainly many real economic reasons for that, but it's like that's not the space I want to play in. Like that's not the level I want to work with. I want to bring that highest quality. I want it to be beautiful, and sometimes that can be beautiful with constraints, but to your point, Alicia, it's like that's just not the space I want to play in. Like,
but how many times do you see that space miss the target? Like, oh, that is beautiful and terrible to watch. Like,
but there's also something to be said about like young kids who like you can give them something that's not amazing and beautiful, and that's fine. But there's also, I mean, kids also remember like pretty things that they see. Like I still remember the Disney movies when I was little. I don't know, but I don't know what I'm looking at. I don't know like the amazing thing that I'm seeing. I just know it's amazing, and
but when you go back and watch it, you're like, what I thought was amazing, didn't?
But like Pocahontas or like Lion King or
watch Little Mermaid. I was watching Little Mermaid because we have Disney Plus. I was watching Little Mermaid, and she's like in her cave singing her song.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, ooh.
You're watching your eyes change the distance between.
And like, no offense to anybody who did that. Or
wait,
like,
what?
Well, you just see the space between the eyes like not sticking. You're just like,
I almost wonder how much of that is digital though. Like, I wonder how much of that like broke in the process of not seeing it on film.
Maybe.
But I have the same issue where it's like when you remember, you're like, oh, I'm gonna watch this thing, and you're like
watching old episodes of Knight Rider.
Yeah. But again, like your context changes, and so I think in that same way, like you have to temper the effect. And I was working with someone about retargeting motion, and I think I may have posted this on Twitter, but it's like, the end result is, does it feel right? And if it feels right and looks good and connects with the audience, then you've done your job. You don't need an extra, like, you may feel better that knowing that every vertex doesn't clip and everything like muscle is accurate, and you've spent all this time and it's 1 second on screen. Like the budget balance, the end result, the time, like you make a rig that's amazing but slow, and the animator doesn't iterate and the animation is less than right. It's you are responsible for balancing the tools. You can't make a camera for a photographer that takes amazing pictures if they don't move and if they have perfect lighting. Like, that's unreasonable. And yet that's the iPhone first camera. Everyone's like, you can take amazing pictures, just don't move and be in full sun, and and it was good enough, right? Everyone's like, I have a camera now in my pocket, good enough.
Well, I think that is the interesting.
So our companies were like, oh my God, I'm not selling $1,000 camera anymore. So
what is good enough is, that's an interesting thing, right? Good enough is an interesting target, because it is different. It is different for every endeavor. And it can be a financial good enough, it can be an artistic good enough, it can be, does it tell the story? You know, and I think now with games and film kind of converging, like good enough is a weird mix of who knows what now.
And I think other thing on the like qualities and what is the standard, like high and low end, like from like few years ago or many years ago until now, like ultra realistic was the like high end thing, the most complex, and stylized was the cheap thing, the let's say quotes there. Now I think it's almost the opposite, and if it's not now, it's gonna be in a few like very short. Because that the ultra like ultra realistic
came out and broke everybody, right?
Ultra realistic is the cheap.
His mind was just blown, like watching this thing going.
My supervisor was the rigging supervisor.
Nice.
And
so good.
And
I watched the movie with him, and I got all the downloads.
We need to do another podcast with him.
He will never do a podcast.
Oh no.
But yeah, Miguel, right? Like it was like, we gotta make this more real,
and the other thing that I wanted to comment, it's like, I think I'm very like a comics fan, like and you know, if you think like what is a good comic, it depends. It's if you go to European comic, the art it's crazy in some of the art books. It's crazy. It takes years to do one like book. Then you have the American comic that has his own language and his own style. You have the manga style, kind of like, let's say, schools. I don't know how to say it. And then you have this indie comic for adults that I personally love. For many years I was taking like this draw and this thing, the quality, but now like, and I think especially when I was in Montreal, there is a really nice bookstore there for indie. I think it's in Myland at the end. I don't remember the name, but they have.
I think I've been there. I think I've been there.
It's very small one, I think, and they do editorial, and I discover many comic books there from like artists, like indie artists, that I really love it. And you think the draws are by far, you can see kind of like naive draws, some of but the stories, and I really enjoy that. So I think, like you were saying, like the target audience, which is the target audience before, was this kind of like, this is the adult, this is the child, and this is the quality, and this is the quality, and blah blah blah. Now I think it's more about what you're trying to convey with the whole as a unit, if it's a game, if it's a story, it's a short story, a movie, whatever, and the target. And we will see more with the ease of the technology allowing that, I think.
I feel like that's it's definitely broadened, right? Like when I was learning animation back in, whenever, I mean, I've known what I wanted to do for a long time, and I didn't know how to do it or how to get there or if it was even possible, but I was like, I knew the direction I wanted to go at a fairly young age. And by the time I graduated high school, I had been watching like every behind the scenes thing and like making of and like whatever I could find, but it was still it felt very removed from my reality. Mm-hmm. And so, when I started going to college and looking at stuff, you'd go to like an indie, like animation festival, and you'd see like one thing that was incredible, or like the early Mind's Eye videos, where most of it was just like spheres and things, and then there'd be like some little amazing blip of animation from like PDI or something, right? Like, it was so hard to find, but you'd see it and you're like, that is amazing. Mm-hmm. And now it feels like that kind of stuff is everywhere. Yeah. And it's context based, right? Like you go to an indie bookstore and you pick up a magazine, you don't expect it to be like an X-Men comic, but you're like, I bet this story is really cool and it's gritty, and it's like you can feel the creator in the story and in what you're looking for. It's exactly what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at Spider-Man and your distribution audience is a huge amount of people, and the context is they expect a certain look and style and story that has got legacy asset, right? Like it started off, you can kind of do whatever, and then it has to have a standard. And I feel like the same thing happens now with digital storytelling and tools, right? Yeah, you can make a game that is super high concept and it's really cool, but if you're wanting to play a really awesome Quake-like game, that's not going to satisfy you. Right. But you can appreciate both, but they don't have to be the same thing. And for a while I felt like all games tried to be the same thing. Whatever was popular, Grand Theft Auto was great, let's rip that off. And
I think
or copy it to get on that bandwagon. But now it feels like everyone can be creative in their own way and still find a voice and be inspired and interesting, and you can support that creativity without like making an Avengers film. I love them.
Definitely in games, like that's definitely true. I think maybe because the barrier of entry is lower, like finding a game engine that first of all does 3D and is free, like that's insane. That didn't exist when I was little. Like you'd have to write your own engine maybe, or all the engines are proprietary. Like if you were to do like a World of Warcraft or StarCraft mod, then you'd
you were just doing mods in that engine.
So the barrier of entry of an artist or a game designer is lower now, and that's introducing just like so many types of ideas, and like that's what it actually excites me the most about like games right now. Is like I'm excited about the indie games. I'm excited that like somebody in their apartment had an idea and they took Unity and just made a game, and now it's like insanely popular, something like that. Like
Flappy Bird.
I mean
Flappy
That's
Bird.
story.
That's almost a sad tale. Like, don't bring the energy down.
Sorry. I just
Flappy Bird is such a good story.
Yeah, but no, I mean it's cool because to your point, Miguel, like the chase for photorealism reached a certain point, and I can imagine people going, yeah, but then we have to make everything photoreal. Like you gotta like how expensive is that versus if I take the stylized route, I can be really creative and also production minded, and it feels
and it's still expensive.
Yeah, it can still be expensive, but the point is you can push things, and I do think at a certain point everybody's kind of tired of reality, right? It's like, all right, cool, but show me something different. That's where Spider-Verse for me was. I'm seeing something different, and it was awesome.
And exciting.
My boss would, I think my boss would hate me, but I'm just gonna say it anyway. He was like taking a risk with that film.
Of course he was.
Well, everybody did, but I think now you see it show up in games, right? The new Spider-Man PlayStation game, it's got that feel. They're like, we want to make this feel like it is in the game. And there's I'm gonna do a quick plug because Raph Anzeman, Richard Lyko, and I are gonna do a talk for Anim State. We got our talk approved. So the three of us are going to do an hour roundtable on animation, ephemeral animation discussion. So, I joke that I'm just there to break things and make things sad, but we come back to the idea that it's a risk because the expectations are this is going to be hard to do and we don't know how to do it. But the more you remove that barrier from the tools, like, I can only get this rig in Maya, I can only animate in this software, I can only get that look out of Unreal, you start to remove all that, and now it's like, I have this idea, I want to see a movie that looks like a stippled Liechtenstein drawing, and it like, will that even work? I don't know, but we can get that rendered and done, and it feels right, and you decide like in a 15-minute shot, like, this is amazing, let's spend 3 years making it, versus spending 3 years making the game, 6 years making a movie, and decide, that was a flop. Hey, Iron Giant came out, we're not going to market it, forget it. And you're like, no, I love that. Sorry. It's just, it flips it around.
But the thing, it's like the audience now, it's also more like willing to receive this before. I think the big, like I remember before it was all 2D, and Pixar released a Toy Story, and it was a game changer, but it was also a lot of rejection. The people, it looks like whatever. But that changed the thread, and then it goes
but it was
better,
good
better.
enough.
Yeah. But what I mean is like now
We need our T-shirt.
Good enough.
Roundtable, good enough.
But the thing is like I think now that people is used to all this digital creation, and all 2D, now 2D is coming back. Digital, it's spreading from the canon that was originally like Pixar style, that make the canon for cartoon like stylized animation for animation features, and then was the ultra realistic Jurassic Park line that was the ultra realistic, and I think these lines established the canon for many years, and now with the like this openness, I think there is
the audience is ready.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
It's because they watch so many terrible little cartoons on YouTube.
My little AI work. No, I'm just kidding, but
everybody certainly as an audience is more sophisticated now than they were 20 years ago.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, if you look at Toy Story now, right, it holds up because the story was really good, and the animation.
You care about those characters,
but it's like you can tell the difference, and it, and then you look at Toy Story 4, and you're like, that doesn't feel at all like the first movie, but the first movie was like we'd never seen it before, right? Like it was the conquistadors coming over in ships and the native tribes going, I don't know what I'm looking at.
Well, it's Star Wars in the 70s, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you the context and the expectation at this moment in time is going to be good enough. And then 4 years down the line, after everyone's gotten used to it, then the next version of that has to be better. But it should be better because you've taken all that information to get there and build on it. And I think to me, I think that's still the problem of balancing it as an independent artist or as a creator, or as a person inside a studio. The expectation of the client and your own team and what they want to do and what is reasonable within the time limit. Like for management, like that's still a nightmare, because you're like, well, I want it to look like Hulk, and you're like, well, you have the scanning budget to scan a person and do a full, like, what's reasonable is muscle sim. What's not reasonable is an actor and 4 weeks of scanning and processing and 100 people to get it to that point, and then you start the process of making it move. And you're like, okay, well now, like at each stage, it all has to hold up together. And this was early on, this was the same argument I'd have with animators and mocap. Like, oh, mocap, the producer thinks it's going to solve our problem and be super fast. And my first response always was like, nope, it's more work. It's just upfront. Mm-hmm. What it gives you is a standard platform to build from, instead of a bunch of individual pieces that are all out of sync and then they finish close enough, right? You go do a capture, you spent weeks planning the shoot, you get everything prepped, you scan everything, right? You capture all the data, you have everything at the same level. Now, everyone, regardless of skill level, can build from that, and you never go below unless you really mess it up. But you have a starting point that is organized and not finished at the end, and hopefully everything is the same level. And one animation's not great, one animation's amazing, like everyone had to manage who was the better animator. No, you start at the front end, and now everything is at the baseline of, here's real. Make it fit your character, make it look right on the character, enhance it, but you always are at a standard point. And so I think with rigging, we're still not there at that standard point. Like you can get like a Daz character that's basically skinned and has clothing or whatever, but it's not going to sim the same way. You can get a muscles character from Ziva and it's a baseline rig and deformation system, and then you can enhance it. But if a character modeler wants to model some crazy alien, like we don't have a baseline that motion capture or taking a picture gives us. And that's where we're still missing the mark rigging wise. The AI rig net, right? Like you can feed it information and get a rig that's similar based on what you feed it. The deformation system, Rich, you've built a library that you're having to fit manually, or that can be repurposed because it's really powerful, but we're still under the ledge where we have each TD's ability is whether or not you can push it and the budget and all this stuff, instead of just going, here's the baseline rig that can be purposed and fit, and it's going to sim and looks great and then flexes and all that stuff. That's where we're still missing a huge chunk. And I don't know how far away we are from getting to that level, but I've a long time. to get to now.
Yeah, I've watched all kinds of auto rig efforts come up with great fanfare and fail, and like just.
And yet
so
my pet's still out there.
Well, I just even mean like, you know, we're going to make this so that we can reuse this stuff over and over again, and it'll just automatically work, you know, and I've been involved like passionately trying to make it work, and you end up at the end of the day, you're like, you know, someday I think the reality you want will exist. I mean, it has to, I think, but right now, if we can get to 80 or 90% really, really fast, we can spend the last 10% just making the art right, making things pretty, making. I think that is the thing I am chasing right now, which is how can I make 80% happen instantaneously, and then spend the last 20% just art directing and bringing sensibilities and stylizing and whatever. So personally, that is the path I'm on. I'm not trying to build an automatic magic system. I just want it to be.
It's also we're always at the whim of technology and how fast technology can.
And how and will the animators use it? Right? To some degree. Like the control side, the UI side is different, right? And this is the thing that I still struggle with. It's like, I know I built it, so I know what it's capable of and how I can use it to the best advantage. But if I hand that off without like a day of training, do they understand that? And you know, the deformation side is the final look of it, but the deformation is only as good as the motion driving it. So, you know, if they refuse to use a clavicle control and the arms just break, you know, like.
I've seen your reaction, Alicia. It's like, why is your arm breaking? Because you're breaking the arm.
But like each stage has to go together, right? The modeling has to support the deformation. The motion rig has to support the movement in a way that makes the deformation feel right, and it all has to be at the same level. Like Avengers works because everyone worked together to the same level, and everywhere else it's still jumbled. You are at the whim of like, well, I got this one good model and I bought this other one from a scan store, and this rig is like just okay. I used M gear, but I don't have good deformation, or I have a Ziva rig, but the animator wanted this extra control and I have no idea how to do it. Like I can't integrate it. So at each stage, there's still this like fight to just get to good enough. And it's
wonder what that will look like. You know, I feel like someday we will get there where there's some standardization and stuff, but it's really hard because it just seems like our variables in the rigging space are so all over the map. Like where animators animation is that performance, which is almost standardized in a way. Like you're trying to make appealing motions, but like I feel like every couple of years I'm trying to figure out how to do the same thing over again better, or there's a slight difference in something, and then it's not going to work the same way, or get a different art director that wants to see shapes moving in a different way, or it's like
Google. What did I do before?
Well, I mean, I don't know how often I've solved. You guys mentioned earlier, like you solve a problem and then you forget that you solved it, and then you go find your own solution later. But I mean, I would love for that. I would love for there to be some kind of standard, but it's like it just feels like we're not close to that yet. Like
I feel like we're moving farther and farther away from it, to be honest. Like we talk about like it seems like, as you say, the new trend is that you have like specialized software for different things, right? So like for me, I'm at a point now where I kind of go into my production bubble and then I pop my head up and I'm like, okay, I want to improve myself as an artist. What's the next thing that I look at, right? So like for me, okay, it's I have my Maya skills, great. Furthering Unreal skills, awesome. Maya now has Bifrost, okay. Houdini has their tools, which I don't know the actual name of, but like, so it's kind of like, what do I focus on, right? Like what basket do I put my eggs in? So that, and because for me it's a very like we're talking about all these large high level things, it's a very low level thing of like, for me as an artist, what basket do I put my eggs in so that I can have longevity in my career? And I feel like this happens like you say, Rich, every 2 or 3 years is a new thing, and you're like, oh, I have to jump on that. And
Yeah.
I think that like goes back to what Brad was saying in his interview, that like a good tech artist needs to be resilient and like not be afraid of making mistakes and like being wrong and like learning new things. Like that is the whole thing about being a tech artist, is we're not static. Like we don't just, what's funny is I'm learning like to draw and to do traditional art from concept artists, and when I talk to them, they're like, oh, I learned stuff from like 1,000 years ago and like the skills are the same. I have no idea what you do because you do like cutting edge stuff. Like that is like the reality of our job, is like we have to
the way colors
constantly
mix doesn't suddenly change.
yeah, exactly. Like the human anatomy is not that much different than like it's the reality of
and like being willing to go, where do you I watched people like basically fall out of the industry because they were unwilling to change. And you go, okay, because there is a point when you go, I'm honing, I'm refining, I'm getting better, and then you go, you poke your head out, like you said, Alicia, and you go, the Unreal freight train is coming. So like,
you better hop on that.
I got to figure out how I'm gonna go. And ZBrush was a big one, right? How now what's interesting about that particular one is when a bunch of interns come in and doing modeling work, and they're all using ZBrush. Like for me, that's certainly not where I got my start. And so their topology is crap.
Oh yes.
Like it's like they don't even know how to think about like it's like, oh guys, you can't use
why
ZBrush
are we still caring? Like what, they don't care. Why should we still care? Because we're still back in the dark ages, manually worried about points weighting, right? Like we're still out of sync.
So we've got to figure out how to get, because the thing is, I still don't know how to resolve the problem of how do I pull and push and make shapes happen in a directable way that isn't just sculpting at every frame. Because that's not practical either.
But right? That's what I was saying about like the technology also has to like advance, because like because like computers just for games, it just can't handle like all the stuff you were showing in Modo. Like that was pretty awesome, but like that a game engine is not. Again, I'm just working with bones and skins right now. Like I'm waiting for like the game engines to really
and his system will allow that to a degree, but as soon as you put that on a Madden with a full football team, you're still going to hit a millisecond loss, right? Like and again, this is like, how do we? For me, I've struggled learning things for a while, as far as just in general, like. Izzy could outcode me no matter what. Like even at her worst coding, it's still better than what I've got. Miguel's got a better auto rig tool than I've ever written. Rich has got amazing deformation stuff and years of deformation experience that I won't have. And Alicia, your personal skills and management qualities, and on top of the technical stuff, are well beyond what I have the mental capacity to just do. Right? Like I'm not going to be that kind of leader ever. But how I continue to learn is I come back to focusing on the foundation principles of what I'm trying to do. And for me, if I want to work on better deformation, there will be 2 to 10 new Pixar level papers about new deformation models. But I need to go back and look at, okay, how does the bone interact with the skin, right? Like I go back to the foundation reference. When you look at animators that are stuck trying to get better, they're looking at animation. They need to be looking at what the masters looked at. And that's something that comes up over and over again. It's like, don't look to the masters, look at what they looked at. So when you pop up out of production, you're like, oh my God, there's new Unreal and Houdini and all this stuff. It's like, what is the problem I want to solve? Or, you focus on a new area to learn. I want to learn Blender. Well, I can't learn Blender outside of my realm. I'm going to work on, does it have a nonlinear animation tool? Yes. Oh, it's broken. Well, hey, everybody, I'm trying to learn this. What are these tools? And then it's crickets. And
just get like good enough.
You have a theme song.
So I'm like, hey, I'm trying to figure this out. No one has figured it out. Okay, well, I'm just going to click around and break stuff and go back to what I know, which is what I've drawn on from these other sources. I know that I need to blend motion. How do I try it? Right. So, I always try to come back to a very focused thing to try to learn with, and not give myself too many options. I don't need to learn Unreal. I just need to learn how to get my character in there. And from there, I'll discover things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's my process, is like, I need a little chunk I need an entry point, and then I need some breathing room to play and break stuff. And then I can look around and go, oh, someone's doing that. Oh, I understand that relating to.
But you're still innovating. You're still going and looking at new things to readapt your knowledge base, and that was kind of my point, where it's like you've got to be willing to go.
Approach it can be.
Yeah.
It's like
terrible.
You're approaching it like a project-based thing, which is also how I learn too. Like I don't learn by like diving into a book. I like try to make something that I want to make and find the tools to make it, and then go from there.
Yeah. And then I try as quickly as possible to find all the people that are doing something with it, because the point now of us not having to send things by carrier pigeon and by waiting for 5 weeks for a boat to cross the ocean is that I can go, Miguel, hey, you just did this cool thing I saw. Like, where did you figure that out? How did you do that? And I can, we can draw on the collective much faster, and not to just try to skip a process, but just to have a new understanding of it in a way that is using your time wisely, right? Because again, like, I don't want to start from scratch learning how to make paint. If you made an awesome paint, I'm like, I mixed these things and found this. Great, let's all build on that instead of starting from scratch every time.
We write in the shoulder of giants. That's you can resume on that. And also I think like all this technology coming on, all these new things, it's all great, and for me it creates kind of anxiety on the time. Like I don't have time for learn all these things. And what I think my I don't know, say like my go-to, it's like the any advantage, it's worth the investment. If you can reply that yes, this is something I really cannot do it with my actual tool set, I will add it. If it's gonna be here a little better, here it's just no, so that, so at the end it's a trade-off. I will not invest my time, because at the end it's the time it's the most important, where you.
Isn't it funny too? Like at the end of the day, it's all about shapes in motion, right? Like everything that we do is
pushing points.
It is getting
over
shape.
time though. That's the difference.
Yeah, I have a script.
Shapes in motion, right?
I have a script that put one control per vertex, perfect rig.
Oh, complete control,
absolute control.
Brad's gonna be like, "That's great. That's the way it should be."
That's exactly right. Animators should animate, and rigging is done. Give them give them good brushes.
It's three lines. First auto rigger ever. 3 lines of script.
Just model it, right? That never works. The animator doesn't want to hear just open up ZBrush and sculpt. But I think that's like what Raf's doing with ephemeral rigging stuff is right. But there are the tools that have done so from a point of view of, hey, I've made a tool that lets you do this, instead of an animator going, I want to do this. I need the tool. And you see the development of some really nice rigging technology or tools that come out of an animator coming from that point of view, right? And you see other areas where the animator just refuses to be stopped by the tool, meaning they're not, all the VR animation, right? Like that stuff's incredible, but it's basically frame by frame sculpting. Stop motion people, it's still frame by frame. To some degree, they're still stuck. And you look at Raf with the ephemeral rigging, and you're like, he initially said, this rigging style only works for my animation. And, it doesn't really apply for VFX, or, it doesn't work beyond that context. And I said, look, this is how motion's been done forever. I don't know why you limited to this one, your style. It's not, it's an interaction mode. It's not that the rig has to behave this way all the time. It does for him, because that's the way he animates. But instead of building a rig that is slowed down by every feature, the tooling removes that. All you have to do is decide, do I interpolate or not, and when, and then what tools are built around those poses. And everything else is just post-processing. If I create a bunch of frames, those frames shouldn't interact and rely on each other unless I want them to.
Yeah.
They right now we're always forced to have interpolation. You set a key, you move, and they have relationships over time.
Yeah.
Raph's rig is I pose it, and when I let go, there is no. I don't know where I was.
It's
I'm just here
basically
right now.
digital stop mo, man. What you're talking about?
Except that you have the ability to, and Raph wants the ability to manipulate across frames in time. And you look at Houdini taking the concept of a frame and pushing it to geometry and splitting it out as physical points and lines over time that are disconnected. You suddenly can lattice deform an entire animation as geometry. Yeah. You're no longer syncing. You're no longer linking one pose to the next through a bunch of attribute values. You're just creating snapshots that relate as postures. And when you decide you want to interpolate it again, then you can redo that stuff. So
you're gonna have to figure this all out. Teach us so that we can.
But I think.
But that's again. It's a rig style. It's not a, but both things have to come up. You have to have the rigging tools, and the animators have to play with it and be comfortable with it. And those things have to go up together. The tools, the animation, the technology, and then the deformation side still has to look good in the end. But we have the other problem for me is that it's not just learning one thing. It's like one person can focus on motion systems, one person can focus on deformation, another person's focusing on tooling and pipeline and interaction. And they're all separate disciplines under the one model of like, oh, you're just rigging a character.
Yeah.
Just rig a character. It's fine.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Yes. It's just rigging. Just rigging. It's just rigging.
Like, yeah. Sure. Just rigging.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to when that normalizes a little bit. When it's.
Well, we'll see. We should do these every so often and see. Are we there yet? No.
We're there yet? Yeah.
Check back in 10 years.
Yeah, maybe we can do it. Yeah, I think I think it is a good point if for a wrap here. I don't know, guys, if you feel like we're running on 2 hours 20 in my timer here and a little more. But I think this conversation can go. I mean, I will be happy to continue hours and hours on this, and definitely we should repeat this. Yeah, not every year, but maybe every few months. Maybe we can repeat and have because I really enjoyed this, and a lot of super nice information. I think clarify stuff, and I was. Also, I didn't talk too much. I was just listening like a first listener on this episode.
I think Brad's gonna win the talk the most in the podcast.
I don't have a problem with that. I tried to hold it back. I
was like, I'm gonna be quiet.
Passionate.
I'm gonna be quiet.
Brad's the lecturer. That's his thing.
I don't mean to. Exactly. I just get.
No, I'm not. I love it.
No, it's great. It's
never
great.
change.
I think it's definitely. I will. Like to invite Raph and Zobin.
Yeah.
Also to one of these.
We can open this up and just kind of keep. I mean, what's neat is the different perspectives and point of view. It's super cool.
I think it's great to everybody have this like wisdom together today. It's a really great. And thank you so much. I cannot express my gratitude for all you having the time to come together and have this passion share and go deep on the rabbit hole of this because it's for me I think it's the first time ever I had this opportunity normally it's one-to-one colleague or two max, but we never go like this and all people with some different perspectives.
We can all be in the same room. We got to do
I would love to. I never been in SIGGRAPH. I'm not ashamed to confess. Even here, when it was in Tokyo,
we'll make it happen somehow. We'll get you a ticket. Make a rigging buddies SIGGRAPH. Birds with feathers.
Yes. Rigging buddies.
It's amazing, hearing everyone's perspective and background. I mean, I always feel like, my story is not that special. Like everybody knows what my experience and blah blah blah, but. Then I hear
I love it.
I listen to everybody's different interview, and we all have different perspectives and experiences that we all like bring to the table, and it's so fun meeting new tech artists. Like we're all so different. It's insane.
I always I say like I learn from every single episode of the podcast. I learn something always, and and sometimes it's something like open my mind on different aspects, like from like management. Like when I did the one with Alicia, it was for me was like like a lot of learning, because I'm also like supervising, so I realize how much I have to learn. And for every of you guys, like, and everybody that is not here today, like they always have like some very interesting insights. Even the people like you saying like doesn't feel like it's not so special, or but just sharing that thing that you think is not special, it's something very special for. And there is always something that you can, I mean, if you're willing to learn, there is always something that you can learn from each person. And that's for me the most amazing thing of the podcast up to now. Like,
well, I appreciate you running and having so many people on and doing it consistently, because like awesome. You've been learning, but each one of them is so great to hear, and it doesn't feel like, you know, there are a lot of voices for animation and other disciplines, but tech art tends to have fewer voices.
Are you an animator? No, I'm not an animator.
I used to. I quit. Animators Anonymous.
But that's the nice thing about the stories of each of us. You know, our end goal is the same, and our process ends up kind of being the same, but through different paths.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's kind of neat about it, is that there's space for all of those in the same job. Like the job itself is so open and flexible that all of those, all the ways to get there are still valid, and each one brings something better or different, or expands the role.
Even we don't have a clear name for our title.
Right.
It's tech animator, rigger, character TD. I don't know. There's
setup artist.
Yeah, there you go.
Rigging artist.
Yeah, rigging artist.
Just like the catch-all. Like who's doing something
we gotta come
specific?
Up with it.
Yeah.
We'll have to come up
Who's
with
rigging buddy? Like that's it.
I'm also the IT perforce fixer. I don't use perforce.
Yeah.
I'm a perforce rigger.
Perforce rigger.
Yeah.
Never.
I mean, like brute force rigger.
You mean Excel spreadsheet formula fixer?
Yeah.
Oh my
We're character parents, right? We have to fix all the problems.
We're animator doctors.
Oh wow.
We're the little
We're all
parent.
speaking the truth.
Or
All true.
Ramblinator, something like rambling about animator.
Enabelators.
We can be, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
We can.
It was awesome.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much.
letting me talk too much.
Our pleasure to listen you, and it was great. Thank you so much, guys. Do you want to say something to close, or just?
No, it was great, awesome, great to meet everybody, and I'm looking forward to doing this again. It'll be fun.
Yeah,
great to meet everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel, for organizing it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, Rich, for the idea, actually.
Yeah.
I'm an extrovert, so anytime I can talk to people, I'm happy. So.
As you're in your black room and
hey, no, wait. I'm in my garage.
I know.
Ooh.
Oh, very cool.
I was about to cut this part, but now I'm keeping it this.
Yeah.
Now we are cutting. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
That's it. The one that we wanted to have.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you guys.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to see you.
Bye,
Bye.
bro.
Bye. Bye. Bye.